Indoor, outdoor pool. Yeah.
It'll automatically
St. Charles.
when I get there.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, yeah? Uh-huh.
Cancel it.
Good. This is a good time. I like this like all. Hey, Marty.
We were not.
All right, 6 p.m. We'll call this regular village board meeting to order. If you'd all please join me in a moment of silence. The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, will you take the roll, please?
Trustee Mao.
Present.
Trustee Charo. Trustee Ferguson.
Present.
Trustee Detmers. Here. Trustee Gerger.
Here.
Trustee Fletcher. Present. Village President Kimsey.
Present. Are there any public announcements this evening? Mr. Morgan.
Les Morgan with the Chatham American Legion. Our fish fries have been officially announced starting March the 4th. It'll be to go, eat in, or carry out, or however you want to get it. Okay?
Thank you.
New phone books.
All right, any others? All right, we'll move to public comments on agenda topics, and a reminder for those there, you are allotted 5 minutes to give your public comments if you wish to use all that. And if you would, please make sure to speak in the microphone in a full room. It gets harder to pick it up, so please make sure, and I apologize if I don't read handwriting well. Right off the start.
Board again.
Board again? Rita.
Do I have to come up there?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Can you spell your last name for me?
Dignon.
Thank you.
I don't do this side. I moved to Chatham 6 years ago, and I took a big chunk of money and bought a solar system for my house because I wanted to be 89 years old before it needed to be changed again. Okay, it's for 25 years, and now they're here talking about limiting, instead of grandfathering me in for 25 years, you're telling me that after 10 years, I have to be reevaluated. And that's not fair. People want a quick cost recovery for their money, especially with such a large layout for solar. Otherwise, what's the point? Why change to solar? There's no incentive. Nobody's getting any poorer. Nobody's getting any richer by having solar. The net metering, the cost recovery difference if you change the net metering is amazing. I mean, it's just not justifiable. Just to make more money for the utility. Utilities aren't going to die. They're not going to go away. And I don't know why. I don't know why any community would want to stifle people having incentives for solar. That's all I can say. I spent a lot of money that I could have spent for other things, for solar. And now it's like, you just want to regulate everything? You want to regulate the sun? You know, I'm just saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason Dozier.
For anybody that doesn't have a copy of the email, there's copies to go around. I appreciate your emails, by the way.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We installed solar in 2019 at the end of the 29% tax credit from the federal government. At that time, there were also solar rec credits, which were renewable energy credits. That, along with the one-to-one payback, made solar equitable for us to put in on a 25-year plan. With this change of going to it's 40%. What's proposed and on the current website is 42% of our current, what I see is 12 cents a kilowatt hour. The proposal is right at 489, 0.0489. Correct me if I'm right.
That's right. Yep.
Somewhere in there. So I'm going from a 1-for-1, 1 kilowatt hour to 1 kilowatt hour. So when I produce excess, my neighbors use it. It goes right on the grid. It doesn't go back through any substations. During the night, when I need power, it comes back in on the grid. So the current layout, for lack of a better term, the current net metering policy, we've got a 1-for-1 trade. So when I'm generating solar power in the middle of August, when it's hot, all your air conditioners are running, I'm over-generating what I use. My first year of solar, we generated 92%. I upgraded my solar due to some appliance changes we were going to make, added some panels, and I did that in the middle of 21. Last year, I generated 120%. One problem there, at the end of the year, I had to pay back due to the billing problems the village has. I think everybody's aware that the village has issues, how they deal with solar. What I wasn't expecting was at the end of the year to have a $250 bill to reimburse the city for them taking off my water bill all year. Excuse me. The net metering of 1-to-1, I know I've had some discussions, and I sent everybody that message, the same message you should all have received, including the president. I watched the video from 2 weeks ago. Is that the proper timing?
Yep.
So real quick, I'd like to run through that because I don't know that everybody in the audience, I didn't send it, I only sent it to the village people, staff. So Ryan stated in the meeting, item number 1, everyone's goal is to get to a zero bill with solar. You make as much, you generate, and at the end of the day, you have a zero out. That's what I bought into. The next statement, or item number 2, and I'm sorry, let me go back to item number 1. I don't know how to quantify or qualify the ROI on my system if I'm only going to get 42% of my overproduction for my summer months to cover my winter months where I'm not generating as much. Shorter days. I use more AC in the summer, so I pull more solar. In the winter, we heat with gas, so we use less electricity. For instance, and I printed off my numbers, 21 and 22, I both generated 38 and 39% in January and February. So in January and February, yeah, I'm pulling in 60% of my power from you guys. I'm generating all I can, but I was down for 5 days with snow, when the snow came and it dropped off cold, so my panels were covering. That impacts me, granted. I have no control of that. I don't really want to get up on the roof when it's froze over. So I guess I need to understand how to better calculate the return on my investment if we change to a different reimbursement. Number two, Ryan addressed in the meeting as well, the current billing system, and I'm not going to go down this rat hole tonight, but there are many inefficiencies around the solar billing system. Giving credits, paying me paying back at the end of the year. I'm always told from the billing office there are issues with the system doesn't support it. I know we put in the new system since I've had solar, so maybe that wasn't observed in that system.
Mr. Dozier, that is 5 minutes, not to be rude, but we allocate 5 minutes to each person, and we can have a list to come through.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Ross, Philip Ross.
Hello, how you doing? So I'll try not to rehash things that have been brought up, but I've been in your situation. I watched the video also. I've been on boards for communities and for nonprofits. I understand what it's like to begin a proposal that is just a standard, hey, look at this, we need to get it done, let's pass it, with kind of a minimal explanation. That's kind of what it felt like I saw in the video from 2 weeks ago. So I want to let you know that Chatham has one of the best policies in the state. The things that were changed at the state level were to protect people that were being abused by co-op electric companies, not by municipalities, especially not by Chatham. And we are currently in compliance with all of these state policies. Nothing needs to be changed for us to remain in compliance. So I really think that we need to take time to look through this, since we don't have to have this passed by the 14th. If we take the time to think about what we're doing, why we're changing it. I agree with some of the changes, going from DC to AC, talking about the insurance as properly meeting those things, all that's fine. The main issue I think that most of us have is with changing from net metering to net billing, going from the 1-1 to the solar fair credit. And the handful of solar producers in Chatham aren't going to make a difference to the city, but it makes a huge difference to us. This change isn't going to benefit the vast majority of Chatham residents, but it will greatly diminish the ability of people to install systems, to look forward to making ourselves and our house and our communities a better place. I'm already have a system, so I'm stuck no matter what, but there are many, many people that are currently trying to install systems, some of which have already talked about canceling their contracts if this goes through. So I really think that you need to take that into consideration before voting on anything tonight, and maybe get some more information about what we're legally required to do and what the community really wants from these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Crystal Gunn.
Hello, Village President and Board Trustees. I am here speaking to you in reference to the net billing policy changes on the agenda tonight. I am asking you to please vote no for these changes and leave the current policy as it is for us solar customers in Chatham. We moved to Chatham and had our solar panel system installed. Working with Wind Solar, we purchased our system based on the 25-year performance model. Now that the proposal wants to have it dropped to 10 years, that's just unacceptable. And we as existing customers should be grandfathered in at the very least. This new policy would greatly reduce our ROI and reduce the time for when we see financial benefits from our system. This new policy with insurance changing to fair solar credits and shortening the years that we benefit will deter any future Chatham residents that want to participate in or current ones that want to remain using their solar panels, which is something we should not be encouraging. We should be encouraging more and more residents to work towards a more greener and cleaner energy. After talking to Michelle Knox today from Wind Solar this afternoon, As we sit now, the policy in place is compliant with the right to self-generate language included in the CJA. The March 14th deadline is only for those that are not compliant. So there is no need to change or this to be on the agenda for changes. Michelle was on vacation this week, otherwise she would be here to speak. She has been nice enough to call and email us all day while she sits on the beach in Florida. She loves the policy as it stands now and wants us wants no changes to it, but at least she wants us to consider tabling this until we can have more discussion and more education done from the board on this and when she can come to the next meeting. I feel like these changes are going to affect us negatively just because we have solar. We took advantage of the incentives in there and paid for our solar system, but somehow it's getting turned around that the solar is going to be affecting electricity to others. How is that is what I want to know. How are we driving up the cost? Even when I overproduce at the end of the year, I have to pay in at the end of the year. I was told by the employees of the village that you can't pay me for my energy, but yet you want to charge me for other people's. We are still making, you're still making money off of me and my solar. So please vote no for these policy changes so it doesn't hurt the current community, solar community. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you can, just to keep the decorum, please refrain from cheers and jeers for everybody. We all appreciate that. Anita Bedell, please.
It looks different with everyone wearing a mask here. But, I haven't been here for a while, but our family came here 46 years ago to raise our family in this community because it was such a family-friendly community. And I've been very concerned about the video gambling. I was here opposing it in 2013. And I was disappointed that the village board is considering changing the liquor laws to allow another video gambling parlor at the discount liquor. They have enough taverns. And currently there are 55 video gambling machines in Chatham. And I went to the Illinois Gaming Board website. In January, area residents lost almost $249,000 on these machines, and the village received $12,438. Last year, over $3 million was lost on these machines in Chatham. And the highest losses were at the sushi video gambling parlor, and then Godfather's Pizza. And since video gambling began here, almost $14 million has been lost. $14 million in this community has been lost. That's a lot of money. And where's that money coming from? That's not discretionary money, especially with inflation and high price of groceries. The gas is over $3.50 a gallon. That's people that are addicted. 20% of the people that play those machines will become addicted. There's regular customers. These regular customers are addicted, and they lose all of their money. They borrow from family and friends. They steal. They commit crimes so that they can keep gambling. I worked with a lot of families and people that were addicted to gambling, and it's insidious. It just preys on people, and it's unfair to do this to your own residents in Chatham. So I hope that you will not change this ordinance, because if you do, who will come next? County Market has been here before asking for a separate gaming room where they can pour alcohol. Casey's is going to different communities and getting ordinances changed so that they can have video gambling rooms in their convenience stores. And if they do it, then Shell and Circle K will do it again. So it just will not stop. You will have pressure from a lot of other businesses. So I just ask that you do the right thing and don't change your alcohol laws for more gambling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Darlene Judd? Oh, a pass. Jessica Durhate.
Hi, is it okay if I, okay. My name is Jessica Durhecke. I'm going to talk really, really fast because I have a whole lot to say.
Spell your name for me.
Yes, my last name, Derhake.
Thank you.
So, thanks. So I am by no means a policy wonk. Just putting that out there first. I am a mom, and to me that means that if something needs to be done, I do it. So I have actually spent half of my day on the phone with one of the creators of the CEJA, Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, that mandates these policy changes. And I've learned a lot today. Hopefully I'll have time to tell you what I've learned. So my husband and I and our 2 children moved to Chatham about 2 years ago. 1 month ago, we decided to go solar. We looked at the pricing. We looked at what our average usage was, what that cost us in a year, and honestly, going solar was cheaper. It was cheaper because we signed up for a 30-year loan for a $60,000 system, and those payments spread out are about $130 a month. So our previous utility bill was roughly $250-ish a month. It made sense to switch, right, under those terms, the terms we thought would stay in place for the 30 years of our loan. Yesterday, it was our final inspection before they were going to turn our system on, and we got a visit from a compliance officer. I'm not sure of his full title, but he told us that the net metering rate was going to change, and it was going to change because there was a requirement by March 14th by IMEA. So I learned what that was today, and apparently they are simply advisors to local municipalities and local utility companies. They don't hold any authority. You're not required to do what they say. They simply advise, right? So as other people have already stated, we are already in compliance with CEJA. I know this because I talked to the guy that wrote it today. We've got one of the best, as another gentleman already said, we've got one of the best policies so far. It does not need to change. This recommendation to change is simply to stamp out any competition for the power company. The problem with that is it is extremely short-sighted. Our system produces 127% of the power that we use, of what our average daily usage is. The rest of that, because you can't make money from it, that rule changed a while back. So the rest just goes back into the grid. My neighbors use it. In fact, it goes back to the power company. It takes pressure off of our grid. It may even prolong the usage that we get from that equipment because it is reducing the stress on our grid. And the power company gets to sell the extra energy for free, pure profit. When the compliance officer visited us yesterday, we had 4 other neighbors who were in the process of signing up through the same company that we used. They have all canceled today because of this proposal. There is no logical reason to disincentivize renewable energy. Why would we do that? It takes pressure off of our existing system. When I tried to ask the compliance officer what the reason was for this bill, he said, well, it's because you won't be paying your fair share of upkeep for the grid. So I would hope that the board would take a step back and maybe ask some questions and do a little bit more research before making a decision on this at all. I would like to know what data they have to show that I'm not paying my fair share, because it sounds like every month I'm giving the power company 30% electricity off my roof, and I'm cool with that. I just want to pay 1 bill and not 2, because I've got a 30-year loan. I'd like to know if they have calculated the actual benefit, calculated how much energy goes back into the grid and is not reimbursed currently to folks who have solar, because that's a huge incentive for everyone. If you have a really efficient system, you are giving free power to our community and taking pressure off the grid. It doesn't make sense. I hope that you will not pass this at all, but at least give it a beat. Take a moment, ask some more questions about it, why we would want to disincentivize renewable energy. I think I got it all out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jordana Freer.
You spell that for me?
F as in Frank, R-E-E-R. All right, I've never done this before. Can I ask you questions?
Just
Can I
comment.
ask any questions? Okay. So I would like the Village of Chatham, I would wonder what is the cost, other than the meter that you put on the house when we change over, what is the cost to you? Because it doesn't sound like it costs extra for the new system, because it doesn't take into account the solar. So I keep hearing about cost to this, cost to Chatham. I am new to Chatham. Actually, I grew up here. I was kind of excited to move back here in June of this year. We've only been on our solar for 3 months on a 25-year loan again. And I believe that there are some protections built into the Illinois statutes on solar that you're not penalized for using solar. Like you can't come back on someone for using solar. So I understand if there needs to be a change. Like I said, I'm new. I don't have all the answers. I was on the phone, talking to people today and, checking in with my buddies who are attorneys and things. I'm like, what is going on? And they said, no, there's no reason to actually change it. So I'm questioning, is it a penalty to us? Are we costing you money? Is it costing the grid money? Is it costing the Village of Chatham money? Have you put extra out to compensate for solar? Or, is it taking money out of your pocket? Or is it just that we're not paying into your pocket? I don't know which it is. I don't understand why it would change. And honestly, I've only been doing this for 3 months. I'm freaked out that all of a sudden what I was told is going to be null and void in 10 years. That's huge, guys. And if it doesn't have to change and we're giving, I want to know how much it costs you to buy kilowatt hours when you run out. Ask yourselves that. Because when you run out and you have to pay it, I bet it's not 1-to-1. I bet it's a little bit more. So I would want to be a progressive community. I had hoped I was moving back into a progressive community. Green to me is progressive. I mean, I understand that the utility company has a heartbeat and needs the cash and everything else, but I think we need to just take a beat, like another lady said, and just take a moment and think about what is the actual reason we're doing this. Why is it being changed? What are we costing you guys? What are you getting from us? I'd like to see a budget, a spreadsheet. I'd like to see some numbers, because I've asked our compliance officer, Ryan was amazing. He tried to help me out. He was great, but he couldn't answer any of my questions. And I just found out about this today. So I wish I had more time to get numbers and things and gather information, but I kind of would need that from you guys actually. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be back in Chatham, and I hope you take a minute to just look at everything and give us more answers before you change your policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Horley? Horsley. I'm sorry. That's why I preemptively apologize. I
You
knew
spell
they were
that for
coming.
me, your last name?
Yes, sir. It's Horsley.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, so I'm a member of this community since 2017 and installed solar in July of 2020. I, again, worked with Ryan on everything. And as I've watched the videos and seen things that were posted, I was looking at the Illinois Municipal Utilities Association, and I have that flyer that they had kind of explaining everything, talking about fair share and being equitable. So just a couple comments to go along with that. Let me get to my notes here. I've sent you a couple emails today. I'm sure you've got some of those, but again, agree with what everybody has said so far. Some of the things I just would like the board and the community to think about, what regulatory authority is actually enforcing this change? Based on energy.gov/US, on their more recent article on that, the regulatory authority of who is going to actually enforce this has been a question mark. How do you plan to take this community more green? I mentioned in my email, 2035, 2050, we've got a lot of dates coming up. We don't want to be on the back end of this. I would like to see Chatham be on the front end of what is happening. In my final email I sent you today, I said, please consider this based on that document. Fair share and equitable. That was kind of the key words there. I don't pay any less than delivery fees for my meter. We had to pay more upfront for a meter that spins both ways. Totally understand that. That was my choice. But I still pay the green fee. I still pay the meter fee. I pay all the delivery fees that are involved. So if we really want to be fair and equitable, should I be paying as much as the person that has a $600 bill or the person that has a $50 bill? Because I'm using kilowatts either way. And if the issue, as I've heard in the last week or so here, is we have to be able to pay for the upkeep and the grid and everything else, then it's not us that's the problem. It's the meter fees and everything else that goes along with it, just because we chose to spend money and add solar to our home. So my last comment is we have average increase is about 5% on your taxes whenever you add solar to your home. So if my home is more valuable because of that, do I expect to see a reduction in my taxes going to Chatham from Sangamon County whenever I pay those annually? So if I'm paying more, then I'm getting double penalized for having solar. That just doesn't seem right to me. Totally understand offsetting and trying to get to where you need to be. People speaking about 127%, get them through those winter months and everything. Have no issue with over generating and trying to get you to where you need to be. We've had an electric vehicle and other things to our home, more appliances. So I do not overproduce at this point. But if I overproduce in a couple months, during the summer months, especially fall or a nice sunny day when there's a lot of snow on the ground, I think everybody saw good production on some of that. I'm not going to make that money back. So just please all consider that as you look into voting for this tonight. There's really no regulatory authority. And again, looking over your previous, I even sent you all my documents, and I've been a village trustee before in another community. I know that can all become public. I am perfectly fine with that. That's why I sent it all to you. So if you want to be able to show that information, that is perfectly fine by me. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, you're the last guy on the list, and there's no chance I'm going to read that. So.
Well, I wasn't necessarily planning on speaking. Marty McAlpin from Prairie State Gaming. I spoke at the last board meeting, obviously, presenting the proposal for a Class TG gaming license for discount liquor. I'd just like to say, in just response to the previous comments on that issue, I think, obviously there are clear, issues that you could look at and extrapolate and take the negative from gaming. As I put out in my proposal last week, this is an opportunity for the village to enhance small business in the community and partner with a willing partner in the community that has reinvested back into Chatham for another chance for reinvestment. Video gaming is one of the greatest examples of a public-private partnership in the state of Illinois, generating $3 billion over the decade that it's been live for the state. The fact of the matter is those numbers that were cited earlier, there's absolutely no way to determine if those people are Village of Chatham residents or not that are going into the locations here in Chatham. That being said, big part of gaming revenue goes to help problem gamblers and help root those issues out, and our company at Prairie State Gaming is very committed to that issue as well. But that's all I'll say this evening, and thank you again for your consideration of our proposal.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody we missed?
Can I speak?
Yes, sir.
There's a couple people that came in after.
Yeah, if you that walked in late, I don't want you to miss your chance.
Al Meyer, M-U-I-E-R. All right. I got on Facebook this morning. I saw this proposal for solar. I personally don't have solar myself. However, I cannot agree with the proposal. It just seems it's wrong. Nobody denounces monopolies more than government agencies. However, utilities are a monopoly enforced by you guys. You pass the proposal, they don't have a choice in this. There is no other power company they can go to. You're it. A monopoly has never existed without government force behind it. And this is exactly why people hate monopolies. Because you're doing exactly what you accuse monopolies of doing. You get to a certain point, and you're screwing the customers. You're telling them, right now, we're doing one-to-one. You create an extra kilowatt of energy, we recognize you for that, and it balances out. Now you're talking about reducing what you give them back, 42%. That's not right. And you have the nerve to call it fair share. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing fair about that. It's immoral. Plain and simple. You're doing exactly what every government denounces monopolies for. And there's never been a monopoly that hasn't had government force behind it. So, even though I don't have solar myself, I thought I had to come and say something because this is just not right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
There's two gentlemen that came in late back here. You can speak, go ahead. And then there's one more sitting next.
What's your name?
Okay.
Croteau, C-R-O-T-E-A-U.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for arriving late. I didn't realize you guys started this early. I was at a doctor's appointment as well. I was involved in, I retired from City Water, Light and Power. I was the chairman of that subcommittee that wrote up the net metering and interconnection policies. So I followed this very closely over the years here. I actually spoke here several years ago when the first policies were initiated. I know that there was a lot of discussion about whether you should have extra fees on your meters for those people who go solar and the like. There's just basically a lot of scare background to the solar. It's something new, so it ends up being feared. I do know and have worked with the IMEA in various workshops, but some of the things to dispel I felt were important. Number one, solar is safe. You're not going to have to worry about if a system goes down, it's going to shut off automatically. I put the first solar system in Springfield in 1988, and even back then, the inverters were safe. This is one of the most important things about them. They're all safe. They're going to cut out. So that safety issue is not an issue. Also because linemen are going to make sure that those wires are dead when they get up there. That's standard procedure. And they're not going to be handling wires with bare hands. So the solar is totally safe. The other issue is whether or not there's an upgrade issue with the lines for the substations and the like. When the traditional model of producing a bunch of power and pushing it through all the lines to everybody's houses, through all the substations and everything, if you put there's more demand, it'll heat up the transformers and you're losing efficiency. However, if you put solar on the other side of those substations, you're reducing the heat and wear and tear on the lines. So it's actually a good thing. Solar supports the grid, helps reduce the costs on that grid to do it. If you were worried about too much solar penetration, and now there's a loss of revenue, I mean, and that can be adjusted, but the question is, are you trying to make money, or are you just trying to cover the costs? And that's, unless you're a profit-making venture, then that would identify that. So as long as you're covering your costs, so you don't really need those extra costs for line upgrades and the like. You're probably going to do that anyway, but the solar is going to keep reducing the need for that. Your transformers are going to run cooler. That's going to benefit you there. So at some point, if 100% of the people have all this solar, I understand through Prairie State Power, you've purchased power and have to buy it whether or not you use it all or not. And that would be a more important number to look at when you're determining at what point do you consider your penetration load. And I think that value of solar study really needs to be done around that. the CEJA, the laws have been looking at this intensely and recognized that we have initial conservative motions were, the 3%. But they've also recognized that even 5% is a reasonable number to use. The biggest thing I'd like to just say is that people who buy solar are mostly doing it to help us all. We have got a real global crisis, and the best thing we can do is conserve energy and produce more clean energy. So I want to put my hats off to anybody who's done the solar. I've had solar for a great many years, and it's the right thing to do. So if there's some bureaucratic issues that have to be resolved, that's more important than just ignoring those.
Thank you.
My name is Nick Dodson. Nick Dodson, thank you.
Good evening. Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello, Cleveland.
Thank you for allowing me to give my public comment. My name is Nick Dodson. I'm a homeowner in Sangamon County, and I am also a volunteer organizer and executive committee chair for the Sangamon Valley Sierra Club. This morning, when I learned that the Chatham officials were proposing an ordinance where customers that were self-generating power will be compensated less for the energy they self-generate, and I'm here to simply say that's unacceptable. Why should coal power plant in Missouri be paid more for the same electricity created right here in our literal backyards? If you generate your own solar power, you deserve fair compensation for it. The early adopters of this technology do not deserve to be penalized like they're about to be. I have another important question I'm trying to understand. Why is Chatham moving so quickly with this ordinance? As far as I can tell, there is no reason, aside from potentially incompetence of the bill, which may be the case. If you don't understand the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, it's okay to admit that, and I want everyone in this room making decisions to reflect on that. As it stands, Chatham would not be in violation of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, so there's no reason that they have to rush anything. The only thing the village needs to do to be compliant is to post the policies on the website by March 14th. If you need more help understanding or navigating this process, I know that the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition and all of the experts from the National Resource Defense Council would be glad to help. There is no need for fear of noncompliance. The Climate Equitable Jobs Act was intended to cause utilities with bad policies to make them better, not encourage regressive ordinances in small municipalities like this one tonight. Further, I want to say that taking policy from the Illinois Municipal Electric Agency is effectively taking advice from the fossil fuel industry and should be avoided. Chatham owns the utility and needs to do what is best for the Chatham community. The utility belongs to the people, not to the city council, not to Ameren, not to CWLP. Finally, I'm asking that you table this decision and make space or time to get input from the community in an actual way. Thank you.
All right, have we missed anyone?
Last gentleman that came in and this gentleman here. Oh, sir.
What's your name?
F-A-C-I-L, Collison. I'm here to represent the people of this neighborhood simply because I actually live in the reserve. And I've been living in Springfield for 2 years. I travel all over the country with solar. I've actually worked in Utah, Idaho, California. I've worked in Nevada, South Carolina, Illinois. And the sad thing in the historical situations I've witnessed that people in communities get overrun by committees such as yourselves making decisions. I've witnessed with my own eyes some of the situations that have occurred. The problem is when you have a lot of growth in neighborhoods, buildings coming up and sprouting up, and then you also have demand charges where people are hiked their prices because too many people are using the grid. And then when you have an alternative to bring to assist, why would the president of our country advocate and give an allowance to help neighborhoods be able to offset the cost? Then you also have the state that would also be able to step in. Governor Pritzker signed in, again, some more money to help people offset the cost. For someone to go independent of the grid, is not because they don't want to support the grid. They want to obviously do their part also. When we also know what's happening with our climate, we want to help contribute to offsetting that issue too. But then to have a situation where I personally witnessed in my very first year in solar, Warren Buffett basically took Rocky Mountain Power and switched overnight the net metering agreement without even giving any warning to anybody. And it took 18 months of all the solar companies coming together to actually file a lawsuit against him to reverse the decision, which he then came back to the table. Now, admittedly, some of the people took advantage of the systems that were put in place for net metering. Some people saw that if you actually bought a system that was larger than you built on your house, you were actually entitled to get a check back for the money that you were pushing into the grid. Some people decided they wanted to actually gain and make their homes into businesses rather than being fair and honest with the whole reason why the net metering was set up to begin with. Because of that, that created a problem. Then we had to find a way to address that, find balance. They did find a balance and were able to move forward. It wasn't even 6 months later. They came back. They decided to slash. You push $1 in, you only get 2 cents back initially. But then they came back and they said, you push $1, now you only get 1 cent back. Why would that make sense? And if I have the ability to actually own my own power, as I want to own my own house, why do I now have to be penalized? Not everybody wants to get solar. It doesn't mean the grid's going to close overnight anyways. But for the grid to even take on the responsibility to build enough solar fields to be able to compensate for all the growth and to be able to apply clean power to meet government mandates as well isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take 20, 30 years. In the meantime, we have a war on our hands about to spike, and now with gas prices, everything's going through the roof. Our energy costs are going to go up. People are already struggling with the pandemic. Now we have to deal with bureaucracy again. I want to help people, and that's why I came into this industry. I'm not about the money. I'm about helping the people. But my hands are tied, and I have to keep moving all the time because where I have the opportunity to help people, my hands get tied. So my job's gone. There's other situations you have to think about too. So making a change so speedily too, without a good reason, is beyond me. I hope you guys will seriously think about what it is. I have customers in this area. I've signed up doctors. I've signed up some very intelligent individuals that with their eyes opened, understood. And what also shocks me is that someone who's already signed up to get a system, has panels on and have already got their systems turned on, can't be grandfathered and may have to only have 10 years instead of the 25 years that they paid for. I don't get that. What gives you the authority to change something you signed into agreement months ago? Now you're going to change it, and that's supposed to be acceptable. Thank you.
Sir, thank you. Thank you.
Sir, no?
I talk for less than 5 minutes. I just have 2 more sentences, okay?
Okay.
Most important things, and I forgot them. Question, how much is enough? And whatever happened for the greater good? That's all anybody needs to consider, individuals, companies, whatever. How much is enough? And the greater good. That's going to become way more important than it ever has.
Anybody else we missed? Okay. Thank you. Certainly appreciate everybody following through with our 5-minute limit and the decorum that it takes to run a meeting like this. So that is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. We have no old business. Actually, out of order on your printed agenda, possibly. I will take a motion to bring the consent agenda to the table.
Make that motion. Consent agenda should stay at position D. Yes.
There's an ordinance we need to pass before.
There we go.
Always a reason.
Always a reason. Nobody filled me in. Okay. No old business. Item 1 under new business is an ordinance approving the village's net billing policy. We do have 2 representatives from IMUA here today.
IMEA too.
IMEA, IMUA. all the monikers that are on there. That will give an update and provide additional information on what the Fair Solar Credit is and isn't and how that's calculated. Try to answer some of the questions that were posed this evening and throughout the course of the day. So I will turn that over to Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Jenin.
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you today. So again, my name is Gary Stevenson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for IMUA. I would say, intimately involved with developing the set of recommendations that go into the policies that you're considering right now. A couple things I just wanted to start with. First, we kind of approached this endeavor with a couple of key things in mind. The first was that local control is the key here. There are only certain things that you must do. I think some of the speakers were correct in what they said. There's certain things you have to do to comply with CEJA, and I'll go through those, but you've got lots of flexibility with respect to other things. So I'll just pick one, for example, the Fair Solar Credit. That's our recommendation. That's what we think you should do. You're under no obligation to do it. Okay, you can make your own decisions about how to change that if that fits what you need to do within the city of Chatham, the town of Chatham. Okay, so let's see. So first thing. So what is the municipal system required to do? It's required to update its policies for the interconnection and fair crediting of customer self-generation and storage, and that has to be done by March 14th. Okay, that's pretty much straight from CEJA. The way IMUA approached this was, and this is not, the second bullet point's not from CEJA, this is how we approached it. We thought it was very important that fairness and equity for all utility customers was incredibly important here. While I think all customers deserve respect, your solar customers, they're your customers. They deserve absolute respect. But that has to be balanced with the rest of your customers who do not install solar. And that's sort of the angle we took in developing our recommended policies. How do we try to make sure that there are no cross subsidies that exist between solar installers, solar customers, and non-solar customers? That was a big issue for us. As you've seen across in many parts of the country, that's become a big issue. In the state of Florida, it's a big issue. In the state of California, it's a big issue. The people that can afford and that have the financial wherewithal to install solar, okay, the thinking goes, the folks that can't do that are effectively subsidizing those customers. You could argue with that, but that in general is why there's a tremendous debate right now around what that net metering policy should look like to ensure that you reduce inequities as much as possible. Okay. So just second page, sorry.
No, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
So what does the new law require? Discriminatory fees are not allowed. Okay, so you can't discriminate against solar customers in any way. That could be things like charging fees that only apply to solar customers. That could be things like instituting unfair insurance policies. So for example, saying a customer has to show up with $5 million of liability insurance. You can make an argument, maybe that's not reasonable. Maybe it's discriminatory. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but that's.
All right, if you could, please.
Okay. So you cannot discriminate. Percentage caps need to go away. Those are no longer legal under CEJA. Okay, so that is an absolute change that has to be made. You cannot have any sort of percentage caps. Customers have an absolute right to self-generate, and that cannot be capped in any way. The last thing that has to be done is that the policy has to be posted on your website. Okay, so not a very long list of things that you must do. Okay, you've got, again, lots of flexibility. Okay, so now, before we get into too much detail and I start to confuse people with terminology, just want to make sure we're all sort of speaking the same language here. So this is kind of, the diagram of the electric system that you might use when you go into elementary school to explain how electricity works, but I think it's useful here to kind of go over, right? The power plant generates electricity, and it transmits it through the transmission system. That's usually the high voltage part of the grid. And then at that point, it gets distributed through the distribution system down at the local level, right? So the transmission system is sort of the interstate highway, and the distribution system is the local street network. That's the way to think about it, okay? Okay, so the thinking is all customers should pay their fair share of costs related to generation, transmission, and distribution costs. That seems like it should be a non-controversial statement. Everyone should pay their fair share. Okay, and that includes things like fuel costs, the cost of line crews, insurance, billing, transformers, all that stuff that goes into supplying affordable, reliable electricity. Okay, so some of those costs, as we know, those are avoidable by solar generation, but others are not. Okay. It's pretty clear that generation and transmission costs are avoidable. When you generate power from a solar facility, right, that means that generation and transmission is no longer needed. That incremental little bit is no longer needed from your G&T supplier, which in this case is IMEA. Okay, but before you switch, all right, that last point, and here's the key thing, solar customers still use the distribution system, okay? They use the service drop that goes to their home, they use the transformer that's sitting out in front of their house, and they use the feeders that go back to the substations that are, what are they saying? The main and Independence, right? That they use those feeders to move their power around. And so the thinking is, they should be paying their fair share for those distribution system costs, which are primarily fixed costs, which is part of the issue in the electric utility industry writ large, is that we have very large fixed costs, but we charge it on a variable rate, right? It's per kilowatt hour, which leads to some of these issues. So how do you deal with that? How do you make sure that there's an equitable distribution of those costs? We think it's to make sure that the solar customers get credited for generation and transmission savings, but they pay for distribution costs absent distribution losses. And I'll have a slide in a second that talks about that. So go ahead and switch it, please. Okay, I'll explain it in the context of this fair solar credit. And again, that's our IMUA's concoction. That's not from CEJA. We developed that, and we developed it with the help of a nationally recognized rate consultant called UFS. So it wasn't sort of out of the blue. It was something we worked pretty hard with this consultant to develop. So we think it's grounded in a lot of good theory and good sort of practice across the U.S. So the fair solar credit, what does it include?
Sir, when you use acronyms, can you tell us what that is?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
UFS. That's fair, but I would remind you.
Thank you.
That's fair. UFS.
Yeah, UFS. UFS. Actually, I don't know what it stands for. It's a utility financial services. Okay, there you go. A utility rate consultant. So, what does that credit include? It includes first the value of the customer's excess energy delivered to Chatham's distribution system. Okay, that's the first piece, and I'll explain how that value is derived in a second. It includes the value of capacity savings. That's the value of all the power plants that are out there that are on standby effectively, being ready to serve reliable energy to the grid. Okay, so you get the solar producers get a portion of that capacity charge as value. It's a credit. They get the value of the transmission savings because the transmission system is not used potentially as heavily as it would be without the solar. So it's the third element. And the last element is they get the value of avoided distribution system losses. So you may know about 6 to 7% of your distribution costs are in the form of losses. So those losses are running the transformer out in the street, okay? It takes energy to actually energize it, okay? So there are losses associated with that transformer, and there are losses associated with the circuits, the ones that you see on the distribution lines, that are called I²R losses. Those are thermal losses. Essentially, it's when you inject 1 kilowatt hour, at one end of the line, you get 0.9 kilowatt hours at the other end. Those are losses. And so the thinking goes that the solar producers effectively help the distribution utility reduce those losses because they're supplying electricity at the very local level to their neighbors effectively, or to their, people that live within a pretty small radius of where the panels are. So they get credit for that. So we add up these four, and that determines the fair solar credit. Okay, so what's not included in that value? The first thing is the cost to maintain and operate the local distribution system, the crews, the linemen and line women, if you have those, equipment, insurance, office staff, all that stuff that does not go away when solar panels are on a home and send their power back to the grid, because they need the distribution system to supply it to their neighborhood. Okay, those costs remain the same. Like I said, they're pretty much fixed costs. They don't go away when someone decides to put solar generation on their home. They're still there. Okay, and so to the extent that you do give credit to solar generators for this distribution costs, you've got fixed costs now that need to be recouped somehow. It's sort of a zero-sum game. If the solar producers are not paying it, someone else does. And the only other alternative is the folks that are not producing solar. They have to make up the difference. So in the extreme example that we say have 80% penetration, 80% of the customers have solar, 20% of your customers will be paying 100% of your distribution costs. And to us, that did not seem like that does not seem fair and equitable, okay? And that's an extreme. I know it's extreme, right? It's going to take years and years to get there. But
please stay calm, please.
But remember, the goal of the state, from a policy perspective, is to move this state to a carbon-free grid. That's the goal, okay? So is it completely unrealistic to believe that you will have very high penetration levels of solar? That's a question. Okay. My answer to that is it's within the realm of possibility that you will have very high levels of penetration within 20 years. Okay, so how is it fair? It's calculated on the basis of the time of production. And so, as you may know, there's a market for electricity. It changes every 5 minutes. You're part of what's called the MISO system, Midwest Independent System Operator. And MISO establishes the value of electricity every 5 minutes as system conditions change. So we took that value, that's called real-time pricing. We took that value and we weighted it based on when solar produces, which is a good thing for solar producers because prices at night tend to be very low, right? Well, solar is not producing at night. It's producing during the day, oftentimes during peak hours. So the solar producers get credit for higher prices during those peak hours. Okay, so that's the first thing. We've used essentially publicly available data to do that. You can go right on the MISO website and pull down pricing. And then we took data from NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab out in Colorado that does all the studies around irradiance. How much sun do you have in Chatham? Kind of, you know, what times of the year is it at its peak? That kind of thing, to sort of shape what Chatham's, you know, a hypothetical Chatham solar producer would produce on any particular day. Okay, so I think I covered that one, so you can switch. Okay. And so the last two charts, I think I said a lot of this already, but you know, we worked with a nationally recognized rate consultant. We analyzed the predicted output of solar on a geographic basis. By the way, the MISO price is also very geographic. It sort of hones in on the value of electricity here in Chatham. So it's not the price of electricity in Chicago or the price of electricity in St. Louis. It's the price of electricity at the wholesale level in Chatham. And the way it works is when 10 kilowatts of production is produced at 11 a.m., you get the price at 11 a.m. Sorry. Oops, same amount of time?
5 minutes is up. Sorry.
If you're producing a kilowatt at 5 p.m., you get the value at 5 p.m., which we think is pretty fair. We also, back on capacity and transmission, what we did was we modeled projected system capacity from the solar panels and how it would reduce your capacity costs and transmission costs to give as much credit as possible to when we think the solar panels will be producing electricity. Okay, and then the last piece, again, distribution system losses. That's kind of needs to be tailored to each town, each town's utility. Everyone's got slightly different distribution losses. I would think, I didn't do the analysis, but I think around 6% was the number. So a 6% credit back to the solar producer for the avoidance of distribution system losses was the other element of value. And the last slide. Lots of words. So just paraphrasing here, I'm sorry. I think you need to recover your costs for providing electrical power. Do it in a fair and equitable way so that you're not disadvantaging folks that decide not to do it. And in a way, we came to this trying to be as neutral as possible. We're not trying to incent solar, and we're not trying to disincent solar. IMUA's job, we're not policymakers. That's someone else's, that's above our pay grade. What we wanted to give you was the ability to craft a policy that balanced different constituencies. You can decide to shift it a little bit so if you want to accomplish something else, but we thought that this was the best way to have a program that was as fair as possible. I think I'll end there.
Thank you.
Does any of the trustees have questions for Mr. Stevenson?
I have a question. The 0.0489 is sort of essentially, that's telling me that that's their fair cost of all the fixed costs plus the actual cost of the electricity?
So the fair solar credit, what's the number, 0.0469?
Yeah, 0.0489.
0489. So that is the value of the energy, where and the way we did it was we took last year's average energy value from MISO, the grid operator, and it was shaped by when the production would be. So more credit during the sunny hours, which is good. That makes it higher. It adds the transmission savings, which is straight from the tariffs that you pay Ameren and right, and Ameren. And it adds the value of capacity, which again is another MISO market, pure market value. And then it adds the 6% distribution losses. If you take those four components, you get to that number. It's probably very important to say that, especially with the energy and capacity numbers, those are market-determined numbers. So to pick on capacity for a second, if you believe that with all the coal plant retirements going on right now in MISO, and there are many thousands of megawatts getting retired, kind of a quick look at that would indicate that capacity value is going to start to increase substantially. So you would think that the fair solar credit, it will, naturally rise as market capacity values rise. And the same thing with energy. As natural gas prices increase, which they've, as you, I'm sure, painfully are aware, they've been skyrocketing. As those increase, there's a high correlation between electricity energy value and gas prices. And so we should see energy prices coming up as well. So I would expect, based on what's happening kind of in the global situation right now, and also what's happening within MISO, that the fair solar credit will probably be increasing for next year. Don't hold me to that. Anything can happen, but certainly given the dynamics we see today, I think that's a real possibility.
That leads into my question. One of my questions actually is, have you run your analysis with respect to the 2021 costs and timing and how the sun moves across the sky in Chatham? Have you done that for previous years? 2020, 2019, 2018? I just would like to understand how much that rate might vary from year to year. And the second part of my question is, at what frequency do you anticipate that rate changing? Will it be annually? I mean, I know that's what was presented on our website. Is that study intended to be done more frequently, and thus the rate that the folks would ultimately be credited for, would it change often, or would it be annual as it's suggested?
Every year it will be, I think the plan is to have it kind of be approved by the IMUA board, and then you'd have new numbers every year.
You said approved or accrued?
Approved.
Okay.
Which I think will be a recommendation again.
Right.
It's sort of, we get approval to recommend what the appropriate for solar credit is to you, then obviously you decide, do I accept it or not? But there's two elements here. One is the energy price from MISO, and we'll know that on the very first day of 2023. We'll know.
And what's
January
MISO
1st,
mean? What's MISO mean?
Oh, sorry, Midwest Independent System Operator. They're the grid operator for basically
all Midwest, basically.
Yeah,
it's a huge chunk in the middle of the U.S.
Right down the middle.
And they say which power plant you get things from and how it's distributed and all that.
Yeah, they essentially run the marketplace for energy. They decide which plants run every second.
Yep.
And so, but there's two elements to that. That we'll have the MISO pricing, and then the irradiance from NREL. Okay, I think what they do is they update that every few years. So to the extent that there's a change in irradiance in Chatham, and I'm not sure that changes very much.
Mm-hmm.
They might get like new data, like maybe they go back to 15 years of weather data, and maybe they, every year they add, and so it might change a little bit, but not nearly as dramatically as the energy pricing.
So, in other words, one of the questions that I don't think is yet answered is, have the study that produced the 0489 rate, has that been calculated against previous years with the existing or the previous market rates that we knew occurred at the time? So what would 2020's rate have been? What would 2019's rate have been? And I'd like to understand how much that could vary from year to year. And then that might help them anticipate what the rate might be next year.
Good question. So 2020, MISO market prices were substantially lower. And the reason for that, it was a pandemic year. Natural gas prices were much lower, I think something like 65% lower than they are today. The electricity prices are primarily determined by gas prices, natural gas prices. So 2020 was a low year. And if you go back before that, we've gone through a period here between about 2010 and 2020 of low natural gas prices. There's a lot of reasons for that, but most of it's because of shale. Shale gas was, that kind of revolutionized the gas industry, and it drove gas prices way down. And with it, it drove wholesale electricity prices way down. We seem to be in an environment today where that's kind of ended, and we're in a higher natural gas price environment. And again, if I knew the answer to this, I'd be on a beach somewhere in Bermuda if I knew future gas prices. But my thinking is gas prices are going to be relatively high for a pretty long period of time.
Okay, one last question, Mr. Stevenson. Thanks for your time. Sorry, trustees, for taking all this. But what I heard from what you just said was that the fair solar credit would have been less than 0.489 had it been adopted earlier.
Yes.
And is it true to say that you believe there to be a strong correlation between the fair solar tax credit and the retail traditional rate that we're charging our electric users today? Meaning, if the fair solar rate remains flat because of the market pressures, then there should be a general assumption then that the traditional rate would too remain flat. But if the traditional rate went up, meaning our cost to produce the electricity goes up, then the fair solar credit would probably go up similarly.
No, probably not. And the reason for that is that the portfolio that was built over decades to serve Chatham and the other 36 municipalities that IMEA serves, again, it was constructed over long periods of time. It includes things like Prairie State, Trimble County, a lot of coal facilities, increasingly wind and solar, all with different prices, contract prices, and those are long-term contract prices that are not completely fixed, but very, very stable. Prairie State's a mine-mouth plant, so its costs don't change much from year to year. And so, in a way, and I think this is a good thing, what you pay IMEA, you're very insulated from what's going on in the natural gas and electricity market right now because
of coal.
Because you've got these long-term full requirements contracts. Yes.
I have a question. A couple people stated that our existing policy is totally fine. There was nothing that needed to change. But I understood that Section 7 in the existing policy that limits the amount of people that can have solar panels in our community is at 5% of our total capacity. If we are limited to 5%, that part has to come out because we put a restriction on it. So of all the things that's in our current policy, in my opinion, that's the one thing that does have to come out, correct?
Absolutely true. You can't cap it.
Okay. That's all I need to know.
So can I ask, have you done this study for other areas?
Yes. So every one of our 40 towns that we help within IMUA has received everyone has a sort of a draft policy. It's the same one. A draft interconnection policy. That's the other thing that you'll need to consider. And everyone has their own fair solar credit, they're all a little bit different because every town's got slightly different irradiance, right? Because you can imagine, I don't know, Naperville, it's not as sunny as it is in Metropolis, just because Metropolis is so much further south.
So how do we fall in that as far as
Middle of the road. So let me qualify that. So roughly half of our load, this is IMEA I'm talking about, but even IMUA, half of it's in northern Illinois and is served by PJM, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland. That's the acronym. They're the grid operator for northern Illinois. Chicago, and most of the mid-Atlantic states. PJM has traditionally had significantly higher capacity prices. And because they've had such high capacity prices, that means that value comes back to the solar generators. And so the fair solar credit in our PJM communities is substantially higher than it is in our MISO communities like Chatham.
And we don't have a choice of who he is then, right?
No. Rick?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
I think I have one more question.
Yeah,
That's
go
okay.
ahead.
I'm sorry, now I'm having questions. What typically, I think we are pretty much the only ones left that do the one-to-one, right?
Sorry, the only ones that
Do one-to-one.
only ones that do one-to-one. I don't think that is true. Do you know, Mike?
It's all changing. Everybody's voting on policies like this, so we don't see all of everybody's policies.
Okay.
But
I had that question too.
It's people, UFS, like people just.
Excuse me, we need to.
Oh, you go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
UFS is disconnection consultant, they do rate policies. Most of them are moving to this net billing methodology, and they're moving away from the one-to-one because it's not really, when people generate the electricity and you give them full credit, you're crediting them for the line trucks and all that other stuff. So it's like if someone gives you milk from a farm and you credit them for the milk and a carton and moving the carton around and all that, it's not really fair to the other people that are gonna pay for that. So we're just trying to put this out here, you guys make your own decisions, but you have to look at something, like me, I wanted to go solar, it just won't work on my house. We've got solar in front of our IMA building, we like it, and we're gonna pay these kind of policies. But you do have people, like my mom's in Belleville, Illinois, 93 trees all around her place. She knows I'm not gonna be here for 25 years. She doesn't want solar, she doesn't want to subsidize solar. These are the decisions you have to make, because we want to make solar work, and the state told us, make it work, and that's where we're going. It's just, you've got these balancings, you've got to look at your customers who are doing solar and not doing solar. That's kind of what we're trying to help you out, because we want to make it work for you.
So the surrounding areas was a question that I did have. What are our neighbors doing?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I actually asked that question of our folks today before I came over here. I think we don't know, we haven't gotten a lot of intel about communities, what they've decided to do. You guys are kind of at the leading edge a little bit, not by much, maybe by a week, but we haven't gotten a lot of feedback yet about which direction other communities are going.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We didn't have a motion to bring this to the table.
I'll move to discuss it.
Motion made by trustee Devers, do we have a second?
Second.
Second by trustee Gerger, discussion now.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this until we have, I'd like to get that rate study if we could see it, so we could look at the numbers. Dewey would like a spreadsheet, I know, if we could get one. Just so we can see the numbers and and it could be apples to apples. This has all kind of been thrown at us, so I'd like to motion to table this to a future meeting, and then also make a motion to amend our current net metering to strike out the 5% so we're in compliance. We have to be in compliance for the 14th. That'll get us in compliance, and then we can look at this and have a special meeting to look at it or whatever to include the citizens. I'm so happy that people showed up. Too often people don't show up. We only get to see Santa Claus, and I love seeing him. But it's nice to see everybody show up, and we should look at this a little deeper before making this decision. So that's my motion.
I'll second it because I want to
Okay. First motion to table this ordinance to a future meeting.
Second by Chiara, okay.
So are you going to do the removal in a second?
In the second motion, I'll do the removal.
All right.
Does that work for you? Or change the ordinance beyond what we're talking about?
Right. Let's vote on this. If it's tabled, I think
Can
come
bring
back, we bring
2016 ordinance.
the 2016 ordinance ordinance at the March 8th meeting.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Then we can vote on that.
You can make a statement that we're,
Make a
that
mo-
way we can come into.
Make a
compliance,
motion to
'cause-
bring that to the table March 8th.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, because you're going to bring that, and it's not going to be able to go through committee.
So first motion, table this to a future meeting.
Okay, so trustee Gerger did make a motion. There's a second by trustee Charo. Trustee sorry, that's your job, Dan.
Yes. Roll call?
Any discussion?
No, I think, sorry, go ahead.
I think there's just so much information here that I would like more of what was asked for. And I agree that we'll take a peek, idea, or now, just so that we can collect a little more information.
And
Yeah.
sir that put this together, thank you.
And all I'm asking for is, could I get a response? I know I'm speaking out of turn, but.
Yeah, if
Yep.
you could.
I will.
Save it for after, yes.
So now.
So, there was a.
Discussion.
Yeah, discussion. So, no, I too agree that it should be tabled, and the reason is because there has, as we've all mentioned and obviously observed, is that there's a lot of interest in this, and I feel like the questions that many of the folks reached out to us haven't really been answered until just now. I think everybody in this room probably learned something tonight, and I think there's probably more for us all to learn. And I know that there were many folks that reached out to me that I didn't have a chance to have conversations with, and that's not something that I'm prone to do. So I too would like to table it.
Just for now, I don't think that has to be taken.
Pending a spreadsheet.
Right. No, I have spreadsheets, but I've had conversations, and I too think that there's some confusion about what was said online and what was said in these discussion forums and emails versus what reality was. And I think an open meeting where we all have a fireside chat and we talk through it with each other, I think it would provide more trust in that the board's trying to make the best decision for the village, and also make sure that the citizens believe they're to be heard, or believe they're being heard. So.
Can we, and I totally agree with that, and I love everybody being here. It's nice to have an audience that class participation at the best. And I don't think there's probably a person in this room that didn't spend time on this. So I really appreciate you digging into it, and the exchanges that I have had have been wonderful, and we appreciate that. I would like to make sure that you go home and read the ordinance as is, because I think there's some miscommunication of what's in the ordinance as far as the grandfathering goes and stuff like that. So I would like for you to make sure that read that part, because from my understanding, grandfathering was anyone, as it was written, was anyone that currently had a system. You would be grandfathered for 10 years. So I just want to make sure that that's put out there, and that's subject to change. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think there was a little bit of fear in here that we were just all of a sudden going to change everyone's way of life. And that's not really on that part what was happening.
What I'd like to see is an amount of time for the grandfathering.
Yes.
I'd like to answer to that, and I would like to have a viable percent of what you might be willing to pay for the fair share idea, and really revisit the fair share idea in the ordinance itself, as opposed, because things get out of hand online. It's tough. It's really hard to understand sometimes, and this is a complex issue. Let's face it, energy is something else, and so I need those two things. I need a viable number, and I need an appropriate grandfathering time, and from the majority.
At this, I'm sorry.
It's our discussion.
Yeah, it's awkward. It is a public meeting, but it is a meeting of the board that is held in public. So the conversations at this point, because we're not in public comment session, is for the board.
And that is my question to the board. So, those are the things that I really need to push this forward. I need those two things.
Just to make sure I understand the percentage that you're asking for, you're saying what does Dewey think a reasonable solar credit rate is?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Based on the numbers of the cost of the kilowatt, in this instance.
And I too, I think that there needs to be some time there, because there's people who are in, I think there's 3 families who are currently looking to put it in there, and I think we have 37 homes that currently have it. So it would be nice for those 3 families to have some time to get their system up and running as far as the grandfather clause goes. So I'd like to see somewhere on that line too, that we take that into consideration.
Okay, any further discussion? Mr. Clerk?
Motion to table.
Correct.
Trustee Mao.
Yes.
Trustee Ferguson.
Yes.
Trustee Charo. Trustee Detmers.
Yes.
Trustee Gerger.
Yes.
Trustee Fletcher.
Yes.
Okay, so on the agenda in 2 weeks will be the portion that removes our caps to make sure that those compliance portions are.
So I'd like to make a motion or get a consensus of, if everybody's okay with that, 2 weeks, we bring forward the March 8th meeting, we bring forward and strike number 7, which caps. And that'll get us in compliance with the law, and then we can look at this more diligently. I know we had some billing issues. We do have a utility committee that 3 of us sit on. We will try to tackle that with Pat and the utility girls to try to, so I'll be in touch with you more to look at those issues. So thank you.
Item 2 is an ordinance waiving the park regulations to allow alcoholic beverages at certain village parks on July 4th, July 15th, and July 16th for the Chatham JC's 4th of July event and the Chatham Sweet Corn Festival. Motion to bring that to the floor.
Make that motion.
Trustee Miles made a motion. To have a second?
Second.
Second by Trustee Charo. Any discussion? Hearing none. You do voice here, right?
Trustee Charo.
I'll save you some. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Item 3 is an ordinance amending the liquor code to remove 1 Class P and add 1 Class TG. We have a motion to bring this to the floor. And for anybody that's interested solely in the solar, unless you want to say something more at the end of the meeting, you're more than welcome to leave. We don't get offended if people leave after their topic is. So don't feel obligated unless you would like to say something more later. Do I have a motion to bring this to the floor?
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Charles made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Trustee Fletcher. Any discussion?
Yeah, so I know we kind of had the consensus last time that we were okay with this, but I just wanted to bring to the fact, because I don't think we look at our comprehensive plan enough, and we don't look at our comprehensive survey that we did of the citizens. This was the number 1 thing people were against. So if do you want more video gaming? Like to see more, 13%. Like to see less, 87%. So that's why if somebody gave up an existing license, I'd be for transferring that to them or making that accommodation. But it's clear that the citizens did not want more gaming. They wanted less. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't think enough of us read where, and we should be using this as a guiding document. That's why we spent the money, 20-some grand to do it, is to follow it. So that's all I have.
Any further discussion?
I agree with Brett there in that obviously the findings of the comprehensive study, I think we've talked about the compliance of our existing licenses, and I know that those are being addressed. I appreciate the village's efforts there. I too would like if we could remove licenses of folks not in accordance with our existing ordinances, then that makes sense. That being said, I do appreciate Discount Liquor's investment to the community and would like to see that continue. So yeah, I'm pretty mixed on this one as well. I'm having difficulties. I do think that there'll be a lot of cannibalization, meaning they're going to stop going to Dewey's Pizza Parlor and gambling, and instead they're going to go to Discount Liquor. So I don't know how much new activity is being generated with respect to addiction and other things.
In the comprehensive study, less people wanted more jobs brought into Chatham. Only 85% want more jobs. 87% wanted less gambling.
Any further discussion? Mr. Clerk?
Trustee Charo.
Yes, we covered this. I feel like it was very well said at the last meeting, and I believe they will do this properly.
Trustee Detmers? No. Trustee Ferguson?
No.
Trustee Fletcher?
Yes.
Trustee Gerger?
No.
Trustee Mao?
Abstain.
3 noes.
3 noes, 2 yes.
Yeses and an abstention.
No.
Yeah, that's 4 noes. Okay. The ordinance does not pass. Item 4 is an ordinance approving the bid for a park truck.
Make that motion.
Trustee Miles made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
This is an ordinance approving a truck in response to a bid solicitation for the Chevrolet in the amount of $43,099. Any discussion? Hearing none?
Are we going to be able to get it?
This one's there, right?
Yeah, they've got
It's there, and that's why the consent
This is why the
agenda-
check is sitting later.
Say yes.
Consent agenda is after we vote on this, because then that way Dustin can get the check and take it tomorrow.
Any further discussion?
So he's right in there, so if you really want to make him sweat.
Mr. Clerk.
Trustee Mao?
Yes.
It's not here, it's already made, it's sitting up in line.
On its way?
And it's waiting to be delivered, it said it will be here by April 15th, so.
Walk the check down.
Stress that.
Trustee Mao?
Yes.
Trustee Gerger?
Yes.
Trustee Fletcher?
Yes.
Trustee Ferguson?
Yes.
Trustee Detmers?
yes.
Trustee Charo?
Yes.
Item 5 is a resolution approving backup water supply agreement with the South Sangamon Water Commission. Do I have a motion here, please?
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Miles made a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Trustee Gerger. Any discussion?
Just real quick, I had this same concern earlier as when we discussed it in the committee of the whole, but just to make sure that I'm on the same page and that everybody understands this, is that the SSWC produces water fed through the network into our system and into our above ground storage tanks. Those above ground storage tanks, when filled, produce the pressure that our homes receive. And in the event of an outage at SSWC, our tanks will slowly depreciate or diminish. And, I think to a certain extent, you might notice that in pressure. But we have an agreement with CWLP that would try to keep those tanks filled in the case of SSWC going down. So while it's 90% capacity, it starts to diminish as the input's not coming in from Rochester, but then here comes Springfield right alongside and keeps it up at 90. Are those gates from CWLP? Thank you.
It's that one. If we hit to that point, we're not.
Right, I understand. I read. I think part of this is educating the public, but two, the gates that allow Springfield water in are closed, right, until our staff activate them and open it.
Correct.
And this agreement here states that as long as that event doesn't occur, we're fine to act as a back pressure to their system, right? But as soon as our staff activates those gates and brings water in from Springfield, I don't remember reading, and I'm sorry, but my mind is solar today. I don't remember reading at what rate they'll compensate us. Or,
that's in there.
Again, I really am solared out today.
So we won't lose money.
So the rates for said emergency water shall be then the SSWC wholesale rate or the village water outside rate, whichever is higher. And we do have mechanisms, right, to monitor the push back into, it's very solar-esque. We have meters to
net metering.
We have the ability to understand how much water was pushed back into their systems, and then we'll have the capabilities to produce the bill.
And that's what the new valve that the SSWC is going to install will do. It senses that pressure drop, opens up, and allows our water to go back, keep their system up. And you're right, if it's a short emergency power outage, they lose some poles or something like that, we can do that. if it's going to turn into a day and a half, we're going to run out of water. So we will talk to CWLP about being our backup. And when we start taking water from them, the way the current contract is with CWLP is, we will shut off that valve to the South Sangamon. And they're aware of that.
Okay, so again, trying to educate ourselves and the rest of the community. Because of this agreement, we're at no increased risk to water outages than exist today, right? Because basically what I heard from you is like, hey, if Springfield needs to be opened up, we're going to shut Rochester off.
Correct.
Is that what you just said?
It's not really.
Sorry, but you know what I mean. Sorry.
I know what
I'm
you're
just
saying.
I don't. Anyway, so that would occur. There's one other thing.
If they have if they have a break and lose pressure, and it's going to take them a day or so, we might be able to keep them pressurized. But there's not that many customers between the plant and here. There's a group that's called EJ Water, and they're going to split off and go with Iliopolis. So it might be as many as 30 homes. Does that sound about right? Yeah.
Yeah, the one other objective or question or concern I had with this is that essentially SWC is using our infrastructure that our citizens paid for as a backup or redundant system, right? I mean, we could argue that, but we're not the only customers of SSWC. And I feel like that burden should maybe be split across all of the customers, similar to how the burden of solar might be split across, all solar customers there. So I know that we're kind of aside from that small group you mentioned, we're kind of the first stop in the path. But I guess I just want to publicly say that I feel like New Berlin and other entities that draw from that same benefit or would benefit from that same thing would, again, maybe I just don't know the system well enough, but I feel like it should be fair and equitable.
The other thing is if we don't do this for them, the only alternative they have is to put a tower up. And if that costs $4 million, instead of potentially water rates coming down, they would go up dramatically. So that's why we can help them out by doing this. Monetarily, it doesn't really cost us anything. They're the ones that are going to install the valve. They're going to put all the SCADA on it. We'll be able to control it. And as that water moves back and forth, we'll be able to keep track of it. So we're not going to really lose anything.
Yeah.
But we are, you're right, using the pressure of our system to help them out.
And that's why I'm voting yes, because of the insignificant financial impact. But I do feel it obligated to, New Berlin's just as responsible for providing this redundancy as we are. And if there were a $4 million tank installed, then they would fit the cost of that the same. Again, I know we're proportionally a significant user, but again, I just felt the need to say it. So
If we were in opposite positions and we were New Berlin in the middle of the chain, I'd be over here as Chatham, envious of being in this position here. We want to be in front of them and not behind them, okay?
Any further discussion? Mr. Clerk?
Trustee Ferguson.
Yes.
Trustee Fletcher.
Yes.
Trustee Gerger.
Yes.
Trustee Mao.
Yes.
Trustee Charo.
Yes.
Trustee Detmers.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'll entertain a motion to put the consent agenda on the table.
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Miles made a motion. Second. By Trustee Gerger. Any discussion regarding the warrants or the minutes?
We'll have to check over to Ford tomorrow morning.
Hearing none. Mr. Clerk?
Trustee Mao.
Yes.
Trustee Ferguson.
Yes.
Trustee Charo.
Yes.
Trustee Detmers.
Yes.
Trustee Gerger.
Yes.
Trustee Fletcher.
Yes.
Schedule of meetings is as printed on the agenda. Are there any additional public comments regarding any village business? Anything, same rule, you can have 5 more minutes. for the clerk, remind him who you are.
Philip Ross. Just something to think about as we walk away from this meeting. I know we've talked about solar a lot, but I think one of the key issues that's going to come up is the cost to the non-solar producers. That's going to be the key to this. And as the gentleman from IMEA mentioned, that is a huge debate. And a lot of it centers around California and some of these other big areas, but they're not us. They don't have the same problems we have. So I really want to encourage everyone to research this, come up with their own opinions, and really think about how it's going to affect the community. Because when I see the number for the fair credit, I think, okay, that's how much it's saving the city. I don't argue the number, but it's a framing. To me, I see that as for every kilowatt I put into the grid, I'm saving the city 4 cents, 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So why am I not getting reimbursed for that on top of what I would be paying if I bought the electricity outright? Like, they're framing it as that's how much it's worth, but that's not how much it's worth to me. That's how much it's saving the city. So it's complicated and there's lots of opinions. So I just think that that's going to be the linchpin of this whole conversation going forward. So that's what I'm going to think about. That's what's going to come up. So just giving everyone a heads up, and thank you for your time and for your service.
Thank you.
Any additional?
Hi, Jordan Freer. I know you guys are going to look into it further, and I truly appreciate that. I'm trying to look in it further. To be honest, I'm a special ed teacher. I had like 5 minutes between trying to figure everything out. But I'm a spreadsheet girl. I like data. I like facts.
Me too.
I'm not understanding all of this talk about you're not paying your fair share. I pay my taxes. I pay my green fees. I pay my meter fees. I was told I had to have $1 million insurance, unlike my neighbor. I went out and did that. I even put a little bit of extra on my roof to help out Chatham. I'm like, hey, this will be great. I'm just trying to understand where the fees are. Where are you losing money? Where are we costing you money outside of it? I understand the meter and putting it on. I don't understand how they're saying that we're costing so much money. I'd love to see a breakdown of what one household, what that costs the utility. Do you understand what I'm looking at? Because I keep hearing how we're taking, but I keep thinking, but I pay really high taxes. I'm going to pay super high taxes when they see my solar. I feel like we're getting hit double for making a choice to help our community. I feel like we're being penalized for what we thought would be a good thing and a green thing. So when you're breaking that down and you're making your spreadsheet, I would love to see what it actually costs. Where is this cost above and beyond the taxes we pay? I would just really like that information.
Could I have your contact information after the meeting?
Sure.
Thank you.
Any further?
Jason Dozier. I'm sorry, I got cut off earlier. I didn't get cut off. I ran out of time.
Appreciate that clarification.
I used my time. I am passionate about that. I can see it from both sides. I've had conversations today with Meredith and discussed and tried to see the infrastructure side versus our side. And I continue to hear this, as she just stated, the unfairness, but I put about 25 grand on my roof to generate solar. So I've got an investment too, and I feed my neighbors. I feed them power during the day when I'm overproducing. I also pull back. I pay my $12, $11.50, whatever it is a month. I pay my greens fees and all of those as well. The last thing I want to say that I didn't get there, I shared with you today what I thought were valid questions, and that was my intent. I mean, I didn't want to get up here and do I'm losing it, I'm losing money. I made my decision based on a 25-year payback and an investment. I think that's a fair amount of time to be grandfathered, the term that I made the investment for, and a one-to-one. I know I had discussions with Christine or Charlo today. what's the fair number? I can't give you a fair number without what it costs, knowing what it costs to get the power to me. I don't have, what's your overhead expenses, what's your equipment, salaries, benefits.
What we have though is, if you look at your electric bill every month,
right,
that's what it costs. It costs the cost of electricity, cost of my employees, cost of our trucks, cost of our transformers, cost of our substation, cost of insurance, cost of health care for those guys. So if you look at your bill, that's what we as a group think is your fair share of paying for part of the grid.
Because we're not making profit off of it, and if we were to make, let's say for whatever reason, we made more revenue than all those expenses combined, the monies are kept within the electric fund. It's a standalone fund, meaning I can't buy more mulch at the park, which I'd love to do. I can't take the monies and use it elsewhere. So effectively, what's the cost of a non-for-profit unit of power is the same as the retail price. Now, again, there's math involved in analytics, obviously, because the cost of electricity changes frequently and your revenue rate is fairly consistent. But if you were to watch the financials of the village, the expenses are all detailed there within the electric fund. And again, to Pat's point, that's essentially, like, there's not money that's hidden or money that's transferred to a different group or anything. It's just that's the cost of it, is the same as your retail rate. And then once that becomes imbalanced and the costs are now, because we have some reserves, right? Like any budget should, you have some money set aside in case it gets a little crazy because of Texas snowstorms or whatever. But as those reserves deplete and as you become more and more in the line of like breaking even, then the board has to step in and raise that retail rate up to keep that balance, if that makes sense. Again, I want to have a more conversation with you, and I intend to, but that's my 2-minute explanation.
And in the argument of your fair share, okay? You and you both pay the fixed amount. So do I.
$11 and change.
Yeah. You, when in the evening, when you're buying electricity, you pay the same that I do because you're using our employees, our substations, our every piece that ties all of this web together, you take advantage of. The only time you don't is during the day. During the day, you're generating enough to take care of yourself. I'm paying to cover the cost of keeping the network or that web up during the day also, but you're not. That's the only thing that's missing.
Yeah,
and that's what we're trying to figure out what that number is. Now, is the difference between the 11 cents that you pay us or the almost 5 cents that they're offering to give you back for putting, is that a fair amount? It's hard to figure that.
Right. One of the things, again, I know we're all after this point, but one of the things I think it's really important to think about as we leave is that there are two elements to your electric charge, as you know, the per unit rate and then the monthly recurring cost for the facility charge. That facility charge, as many have argued for years, is undervalued on your bill. And it's done intentionally, but if you were to take all of the fixed cost of the system and divide it by the number of users of the system, that fixed cost should be way higher. I haven't calculated it recently, but imagine the fixed cost being $50 instead of $10, like significantly higher than what it is today. That would make it truly independent between the fixed cost in the transmission versus the units only that you're purchasing over here. And under that scenario, what would happen is, single old man Dewey's 95, I don't even have a TV. I use very little power, but I'd be paying this $50 MRC and a $3 unit charge, and there'd be significant increases to small users, and there'd be significant decreases because you'd argue that the effective rate goes down, right? The per unit rate would have to go down if you're going to make make up the monies on the MRC, the unit rate would come down so that, again, it's balanced because we're not making profit. But folks like the school that use a lot of electricity, they would see great benefits at the expense of poor single Dewey, 90 years old, listening to a radio. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the subsidy, if you will, of how the whole community pays for something that's uber expensive, but in a fair and balanced way. The MRC is low, too low, if you just argued numbers, but it's done intentionally. And more of the weight of the cost are put into the units, right? Because it makes sense. If you use 10 times more units than I do, you should pay for 10 times more of the transport than I do. But that's not, because of that low MRC calculation, that's not how it actually works. A lot of the weight of the fixed goes into the unit rate, which is why this is super uber complicated. Because if we just all made it $50 and forget about old Dewey, then this would be a super simple calculation, I think. It really would. But that's what makes it kind of complicated. And that's what the fair balance is, because, again, the lines, the transmissions, the substations, they're uber expensive. And if we just divided it equally across the 5,000 users, then you'd crush some people and give other people significant benefits. So anyway, I will reach back out to you. I want to have a conversation, but I know now's not the time.
Okay. Very good. One final thing. It's frustrating as a customer to be on the net metering policy. And it was discussed 2 weeks ago, and I found out about this meeting last night with virtually nil amount of time, up till 2 in the morning, back up at 6 in the morning, trying to get my head around what was going on. I don't know if I missed something. It just didn't have a good appearance or a good feeling as a citizen in the village.
I think that's why we elected to table. I think some of us might agree with you, and while it was intended, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but while we need to address the cap by March 14th, I think it was a convenient time to just reevaluate the proposal, and there wasn't really any objection or discussion at the previous meeting that it was discussed. So it was just inferred by maybe members of this board that maybe Chatham doesn't really care about net billing, and now we've been corrected, and we'll spend more time with you and try to help you understand our position, and you can educate us to make better decisions.
We have probably just under 6,000 households that we supply electricity to, but I looked at the number today. We have 34 people have solar panels, and 3 are in the queue.
Right. So it's a small percentage of.
It's a really small percentage of our residents have solar. There is no intention whatsoever of anything that we discussed tonight to try to hamper solar. None whatsoever. It's just we look to our consultants to turn around and help us with a policy. We looked at their recommendations. We discussed it 2 weeks ago in a public forum, and no one came. And there was no really discussion. I was here for the last 2 weeks, got no calls from the public whatsoever, and then evidently last night on Facebook, which I don't follow, it blew up. So that's where we're at tonight. But I'm impressed with you folks that do have solar, knowing your systems and knowing how it works and knowing what you need. At no time did anybody, when we were looking at kind of putting this policy together, tell us that most of your contracts are for 25 years.
They are.
I think years ago when they first started doing this, they were 10-year contracts. And that's what we were going by. But if they're 25-year contracts, well, that's something that we need to know,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was hoping to just give it to Chatham, whatever, the extra. Would you be penalized if you banked your power? You can get batteries and bank your own instead of giving it to the grid. You can keep it.
No, you're not.
You're not penalized. It's a significant investment that you'll have to make in addition to your solar.
But
right.
Over time.
Right, and that's a decision that you'll have to make. Right.
The power wouldn't. If you feel that strongly about it, You can just bank your power.
Right, that's a
That's-
decision.
Well, that's one of the things, because essentially in the setup that was provided for the early adopters, when one-to-one was what was going out there and what you were doing that exchange, because at any given point in time, unless you're using exactly what you're producing, you're either buying or selling.
One or the other.
Yeah, and that sweet spot just doesn't happen, and it's certainly not going to happen 24 hours a day. So the one-to-one exchange as it's set up right now is you're asking the village that at the time that you have that power, take it from me and essentially wait until I need it and give it back. So in that format, you're asking what Ms. Freer just said, can you bank it? Can you put it in battery? And that request is what that one-to-one is essentially doing, is saying the village will store that. In lieu of you buying your own battery, you're asking everybody else to kind of pay for what that storage would be, because you want it back at the same time that you got it. And that's a challenge, because there is a significant investment in storage of that and to have it available to you on demand. When the systems produce, and correct me here if I'm wrong, the biggest bulk of the value that you're getting for your solar system lies in that fact on what you can produce and use yourself before it ever gets to the meter.
It is.
And that's what it's supposed to be.
And that's where the
yours is oversized.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I had it because we were making some equipment changes. So we were at 120. This year we'll be well below 100.
Yeah. So
I added it in June.
And then it works. But when folks try to put a system together that they end up trying to make money at the end of the year, and then they have to pay it back, and then they're upset, well, it's not supposed to be used that way. You're better off to be at 80% than 120%.
But even your users at 80% need the one-to-one.
I understand that. I understand that.
Because, and this is my 2021 numbers, so.
Because
40%.
even at 20 years, if you don't have a one-to-one, it's never going to work.
Well, I'd like to clarify.
Let me finish where I was
Sure.
at this point in time. So we talked about, the vast bulk of it is what you actually produce and use yourself, not in and out, not what you contribute back into the system. So your return on the investment, actually recouping what you put into the system, regardless of how long you decided to finance it for, happens there. The bulk of it happens there. The cost that you avoid by not paying a retail rate. That's where, because you don't have anything added to your bill.
But that's not necessarily, since we're on one-to-one, I don't get any less today, the extra I produced at noon, and then I'm pulling back right now. I have no penalty for that.
And that's
what one-to-one does for me.
right,
So
and that's the spot where you're asking us to store your energy for you until the time that you need it. That's not what the solar, absent a battery, is necessarily designed to do. So there is a request to put everybody on that one-to-one. That's what you're asking, is I want to give it to you when I don't need it, but I want you to give it right back to me when I do. So if that's true, also the arguments on, I'm getting it and it's going to my neighbor, that's no longer accurate, because you're wanting it back on demand. That's what the cost and the difference between what the village pays on a wholesale rate and what the calculations on whatever the fair solar credit is, that's what that's capturing. That ability to have energy on demand 24 hours a day, that anytime you flip the switch, that those lights are going to be on, whether you're producing from your solar panels or not. So the equation on what you're producing and using yourself doesn't change with the fair solar credit. And I think that's an important aspect to do, because you're not getting charged anything for what you produce and use. It's not there. That's your system investment, and that's where you're recovering the cost. The one-to-one ratio, when we buy energy back from you, something that you have produced yourself, You've sold back to the system that's going to be used immediately. It's not stored. It's not stored anywhere. It's going to be used somewhere. There is a disadvantage to the person that does not have a solar system on their roof if the village pays you one rate, despite the fact that our wholesale rate is less than what you're getting as your own real small energy producer. And that's not why you got into it. And that's not why most people got into solar whatsoever. It's for the reasons that you said. If you're sized correctly, it'll reduce your bill. And there's a time frame of that bill reduction that will pay back for you.
I'm 50 years old. I looked at it as an investment that I would have $0. If I could zero out, I would have $0 electricity for 25 years.
See, I don't think you can live there.
No.
Because if you generate, let's just use the number, 20 kilowatts during the day, on a nice sunny day in June, okay? All right? And then sun goes down, you turn on your TV, your lights and everything else, now our meter kicks in.
Right.
All of that extra that you made during the day, it just goes away.
No, it doesn't. It goes to the city on the delivery side. I've got
Right.
received it.
It does.
So,
but you don't get really any credits for it. You only get, in the end, you only get credit for what you used at your house that day that you generated. It shows up someplace, but in the end, that meter at night, when you start taking our electricity, they subtract from each other.
right. So I have two windows on my meter. One's a delivered and a received. So during the day, I'm delivering power to you. At night, I'm receiving power. At the end of the month, they tell me what my delivered and received number was, and the difference is all we care about. So it zeroes out, right? Is that how yours?
Yeah, and we're looking at it as days, where we have to look at this as the whole year.
So-
in August, I'm not going to produce as well.
But we're purchasing.
So while you're using an extended time frame, we're buying by the minute and using by the minute. And that's some of the difference in what you look at when you get to your monthly bill, some of the complication into say, what is the magic number? There's no right answer. Nobody has it and says you do it exactly this way. They engaged with a consultant that studies how efficient, how effective, what are you really producing? And then what is the value to you to have it on demand at the times when you can't produce all you need or anything whatsoever. I mean, today is probably a miserable day, I'm sure, on your system. Today didn't work. And if you got home and you didn't have lights, you'd be upset. But there is a cost to doing that. And so your neighbor who doesn't have a solar system for whatever reason, choice or an inability to do it, financially, doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to do that, shouldn't be put into a spot where they have their utility purchaser buying energy at a higher rate than they otherwise could. That's where this discussion lies in here.
Compared to what they proposed on here, what is the wholesale rate?
The wholesale rate, our average rate, I think that we use this year is about 8 cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
And when
you're looking at 80%.
Well, hang on, and let's talk for the same reason that there's a difference between what the wholesale rate is and what the retail rate is all the stuff that happens in the middle. We don't get a separate meter charge and usage charge from the wholesale provider. So all of that fixed cost that is built into that system, which is the power generation systems that provide the around-the-clock power, which is all the brokers and buyers that are operating to make sure that we have a consistent supply, which is all the transmission that gets it from A to our transformers. It comes into Chatham before any of our stuff gets into that. Those fixed costs are still in there. And when they talk about fair solar credit and sharing that cost, that's what they're talking about. The component of that 8 cents per kilowatt hour, the portion of it that is fixed, when they run through their analysis, what that showed is for our area of 8%, 3% was fixed, 5% was variable. And so what you're providing and what they're telling on that back end there is the variable cost, the cost we avoid. The fixed costs never go away. But the added cost for buying the next kilowatt that we got from you instead of them, that would be 5 cents if we were getting it that way. The next one, after we've covered all the charges that we have to cover, we've done all the fixed stuff that's not going away. The next kilowatt hour in has a value of 5 cents. We're paying you 12 for that.
But if, let's say I'm using what 95-year-old Mr. Dewey was using, he's not incurring any of that extra cost either, and if my amount is the same as his, it doesn't matter if it's a $400,000 house or a $50,000 house. It's how much electricity they're using.
But the difference being at this spot in time is you're talking your experience as input and output or import and export accumulates over a 30-day period or over an annualized period. That's convenient for the math because I know you don't want us to go to the spot where you're looking at a spot reconciliation because that is definitely not to the advantage of anybody that has a solar system. So that's spot reconciliation, not what you want to do. So you have to pick a time period. We agree on the time period. We bill it a monthly basis. That's it. So we look at it. But if you look by the minute at your meter and you set it, sometimes this one's spinning, sometimes this one's spinning, and they're never just standing still. If you had a battery, if you were storing it, or if your system was perfect and only produced exactly what you needed at that moment, every single moment of the day, those things would stand still and none of this discussion would be relevant to you. Nor would it be relevant to anybody else on the side because there's not a flow of resources in or out on either direction. That's what this is talking about. In the cost that we have to have capacity, to have the ability to turn your lights on when you need it, and when your solar system isn't producing or hasn't produced enough, there is a component of that rate that always exists there. And similar to a cable TV lineup, I like one show on one channel, and it comes on once a week, and that's the only time I use my cable. But I don't pay for it 30 minutes. I pay for that. There's a cost to having that available at any point in time. That's what that is. That's that fixed charge that's behind that. That's when somebody does talk about any inequity in the system and is there a cross-subsidization. We'll all tell you it is minor. At the end of the day, it's not a huge number because you're going to use an argument that says, well, there's only 40 people that have it, and you can spread that difference over 5,890 some other customers, and they won't notice, but I will. Well, that's the equity portion of it. That's not right. That is not right to subsidize somebody over here just because we can make it a very small number for everybody else to do that. So that fair solar credit looks to recognize that, yes, there absolutely is a value that you as a residential solar producer and user is providing back to the village. What is that actually worth? What is that worth to my neighbor? That I can say, when I put this back, the reason I got 5 cents is because that's the 5 cents I saved you.
I have two responses. Like I said, a lot of this is about price. Essentially, your argument is that as solar providers, we're purchasing less electricity, so the fixed costs go up for everybody else, which is true. That's completely reasonable. However, someone that puts in LED bulbs and buys a more efficient furnace is also going to use less electricity and cause the cost of everyone else to go up.
Absolutely
so
correct.
You're trying to find a way to penalize us in a roundabout way. And the only thing you can track is the amount of electricity that we put back on the grid.
So from IMEA, we purchase at a wholesale rate. They charge us a wholesale price. And then we're buying yours back at retail. If we went to the market.
12 cents. That's my second point.
Yeah.
So think about this. I produce an extra kilowatt. You buy it from me for 12 cents. You sell it to my neighbor for 12 cents. IMEA says that saves you 4.8 cents in transmission costs. So you're actually netting almost 5 cents per kilowatt hour,
But
which is more than the difference between the wholesale rate.
But if we went to the market to buy the power, which is what we're doing, we're buying the power from you, correct? And when your power goes back to our grid has to deal with that. And we can have failures where our linemen have to show up. That's part of our fixed cost.
The national experts say that when that happens, you're actually saving 4.8 cents. It's not costing you more money for our power to go to our neighbor's house. It's actually saving you money. That's the whole point of their calculation, which is why I agree with their numbers. I just think it's being implemented wrong. It's being used as a penalty for us, even though we're saving you money on the grid. We're saving you the heat costs. We're saving you the transmission costs. We're saving you having to send a lineman out to replace the transformer because it had an extra 5 kilowatts go through it, and that's what caused it to blow.
Instead of offering the 1-to-1 though, if we offered that we would pay you the retail rate, or the wholesale rate, 8 cents.
Sure.
It's more than the 5.
As long as you add on the fair credit rate. If you offer
Well, if that became the fair credit rate.
Plus, the fair credit rate is not the wholesale rate. If you offer us how much it costs you wholesale, plus how much we're saving you, I'd be fine with that. But that's not what you're saying.
Well, that number's pretty close.
No, it's not. It'd be 13 cents versus 5 cents.
Oh, that's right. Instead of the other way. You're right. I'm wrong.
It's been a long day, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's all about rating, and there's a good number. It's just not being used correctly.
Portrayed correctly.
That's why I said it's really important that we go back and actually think about, there's a lot of talking points about being fair to everybody else and the 92-year-old man and all that jazz, and I get that. But there's a problem and there's a number. Just because you have a number and a problem doesn't mean you come together and get a solution.
So what does the board want to do? We already talked about taking Section 7 out at the next meeting. That's also a committee meeting night. Are we going to discuss this stuff then? Are we going to put this on the back burner for a while? What do you just want to do? Because I think these people are interested, but they don't need to come to every Tuesday night meeting in case we might accidentally talk about this and stuff. So is there any kind of plan that we do this in a hurry, which if we get in compliance and we get it posted on the webpage with Section 7 out, we don't have to do anything for a while.
I do think that there's certainly an importance that if you're changing it in any fashion, the sooner we can publicize for the next person that says this is what your formula is going to be, that says as you're analyzing this and as the salesman is sitting at your kitchen table and making you promises, make sure he's using this formula, or she's using, make sure the salesperson is using this formula. There certainly is a benefit to setting what it is going to be on a go-forward basis. We have 2 conversations to go on right now. We have to set what it is on a go-forward basis, and then we have to decide what do we do with somebody that made their decision on a different formula. And that's the grandfather discussion. Yeah. And I'm an accountant, so humor me with the question here. Because 2 different things have shown up in kind of the sharing of data and what your salespeople promised you and what the analysis that they provided to you for. There's a return on an investment and there's a long-term loan that you make. In the majority of solar proposals that I have seen, what is presented to the potential customer says between federal credits, the RECs that you can sell back, any state credits that may get added, they're up in the air as to what those actually are and when those will be available. There's a value assigned to those. And then it says, here's your operating performance. You'll hit a break-even point anywhere from 6 to 10 years, which is a financial So return on investment, you've broken even. Between all those credits and what you do in 6 to 10 years, you're even on your system. Now, whether the cash flow works in a different fashion, because sometimes you're buying and sometimes you're not, you're factoring into the loan term, the 25-year loan period that you've taken out, all of those other things that aren't strictly associated with that. You're trying to balance your cash flow, you're trying to make, what I produce, but the actual value of what you're able to produce and use yourself with the addition of those credits, if there was nothing else, if you didn't have any other bills to pay, that period is generally marketed as a 6 to 10 year return on investment to get you to a break-even point. And then there's a different financing decision that's made because you have other things in your life that are occurring. Is that what you're hearing when somebody tells you your ROI, your break-even point is 7 to 10 years?
Ladies and gentlemen, I sent you mine, just so you have it.
You're one of the many, and I know it was I was on yours, and you said it could be public.
5.9 for my ROI. Again, I've increased since then, electric car, and some other things. So I'm going to use more. I'm not worried about selling back. It's going to happen, but again, in those months that I do overproduce, you want to be able to carry it on. One of the things to come into play with Illinois Shines and the things that were there, my renewable energy credits for 15 years were purchased up front.
So you leverage future cash flow and you borrowed
Solutions,
yeah.
And they basically sent me a check, and then with the tax incentives and everything else, was able to just purchase.
So you took a discounted value today on future cash flows.
Correct.
And that changes.
Set a solid rate for electricity across the board. So, and again, you start getting into those solid rates. That's one of the big benefits is having that consistent rate on my electricity over the term, regardless of what it does.
Correct, and that doesn't change it in any point in time. The biggest benefit to you as a solar is the spot where you can get, at least a base load to be solid for you and consistent. Because now I've determined, with whatever computational figure that they're throwing into that ROI, as you sit down and listen to your sales presentation, they're saying your system is going to produce, and I'm trying to remember, yours is about 9 kilowatt hours a day.
9.3,
So it's going to produce about 9 a day. That's what it can do.
Yeah.
On great days, on perfect days, that's where you're going.
There was a day earlier this month that made like 51 kilowatts.
Is that the day that the sun was reflecting both ways?
It was. Yeah, exactly. So you do have those days where it's going to overproduce, and you have days like today when I looked at it earlier, it only made 4. And you mentioned, sir, earlier what you'd use in a day. Middle of summer, I'm reducing a lot of that power from the grid because that 50 kilowatts that somebody's going to use in that 24-hour period when it's 100 degrees outside at 100% humidity, I'm taking that strain away from the grid and making that energy flow easier to my neighbors.
And that's, to Jason's point, is they talk about what that value is. That's what the 5 cent is. You're avoiding the 3. You don't avoid the 3%. That's always going to be there. And so we avoid 5 cents for every one of those kilowatt hours. That's what the fair share is. Essentially, it's what cost was avoided by everybody else because you were able to put something in.
Correct. And the gentleman that was sitting in front of me that spoke earlier mentioned that in transmission lines and everything else, that fixed rate is probably around 5%. Well, 5% is a lot different than 68%.
That was the transmission loss.
That was the amount
That
lost.
was the loss. So think of it as if you had a hose that had a hole in it. If I put a gallon inside,
based on distance and size of wire and everything.
So that 6% factor is the electric system loss as it goes from point A to point B. How much of that capacity do you actually?
So the fact that my neighbors are gaining that if they're using it on
And
the
that's
grid.
That's why that got added as a component of what the credit should be to somebody that produces it. That's recognized in that formula.
6% loss avoidance.
Yeah, so it does say, yes, you get credit for it. It fully recognizes the fact that, if it's going from you to the guy that lives 20 feet away from you.
No transmission.
No loss. Shane, how would you like a system with no loss?
That
presentation that they gave us, can we put that out?
It is.
It's sitting on board docs right now.
So I want to discuss with you, you were talking about the ROI and the salespeople, and
So, not to interrupt, would you guys like to adjourn, or we can't adjourn and keep talking? Okay, we do need to stay in the meeting, so this is the way that you can talk to more than one or two trustees at a time. Yeah.
So I paid for my system. I made the choice to pull money out of the bank, out of investments.
Correct.
To do an investment, a 25-year investment, because I'm not going to pay $100 a month for my power. You know, get to that, just like I said, get to that zero for the year average. I don't pay power. I'm 50. I'm going to, for the next 25 years, you know, that's the sweet spot. Just like Ryan said, that's the sweet spot. Get to zero. I made them, and I'm not going to say I made a mistake. I put in equipment in the summer because it was better to get the installer to do it in the summer before I put in some different electric appliances in the fall, where now I won't overproduce except for in my summer months, where last year I produced 120%, and the year before I was at 92%. So I calculated what I needed for the changes, added that midsummer. So I did have from midsummer on, my total for the year was 120% production. The other side of that, that's my frustration I brought up earlier, was billing and how that works, and we'll table that for another.
Those are known, and that portion of it is recognized and can get it. But so let me ask you this in this question. While there is the idealistic goal of no electric bill,
correct,
you still need the electric system, though, correct?
Correct.
Because there's times you have to have that. So you need that monster of a system. You need access to that, you know, very capital heavy, capital intensive system. What you're asking us is to say, to get to this, you know, promised land of net zero, is while I'm on my path there, I don't want to pay for any of that, but I am using it. The day like today, you are using it. You need that system to be there for you, and you need it to be immediately there for you. If we pay you the retail rate, if we keep this 1-to-1, that 1-to-1 formula is saying you're not paying anything for that on-demand availability and the ability to access that system 24 hours a day, and at any point in time when your solar panels can't produce what you need. That promised land of net zero at a 1-to-1 ratio is saying, other than the $11 that's on the meter charge, that's it.
There's one delta there, which is the 27% overage that theoretically we could profit
I gave
from.
you 1.3 megawatts last year in my overproduction.
Right, so that is one, Dave. I do definitely follow you, and I agree that, you know, having that on demand has an expense that, you know, if you need it, you should pay for it. I think part of the argument that I want to learn more about is that we're paying part of that with the overproduction of 27% that we don't get compensated for. You're not writing us a check. You're just taking that money and theoretically billing it at 12 cents per unit. And that's me compensating the system for the on-demand access, right? Is that one of your arguments? Or not yours necessarily, but is it one argument of the group that?
The argument is that your view can be correct, but when we're producing our own, we're not paying for the maintenance of the system. But we shouldn't be paying for the maintenance of the system when we're not using it. When we are providing you electricity, you are saving money, and you can pass that saving on to non-solar customers.
In addition to that, can a village resident of Chatham, if I want to become my own producer of electricity, I can oversize my system, I can spend $30,000 on batteries, and I don't need you. Is that legal? I'm pretty sure I have to have service with Chatham as a resident. Yeah. Do I have the option?
I don't know if it's legal or not.
At that point in time, you're in that spot where you're holding it, nothing coming in, nothing going out.
So you guys couldn't bill me at all?
even if you had service, you'd have a meter,
Oh, yeah.
So that doesn't change.
which would be a choice that you're making that says, well, what happens if and I'm going to make up a word just because it's
I'm not able to
convenient.
make that choice.
But
You
my flux capacitor goes out on my solar system, and I can't produce or I can't store.
And then I'm gonna be in the dark.
Right.
But
If
that's-
you want to pay
that's
for
my choice then.
if you want to pay for the access and the ability to access it, yes, you have to have a meter. That's the measuring device.
Yeah, I think you can buy whatever you want and try to reach that net zero, but you still have to have a meter on your house just in case your flux capacitor goes bad.
Correct. But again, if I didn't.
You can sit in the
That's
dark.
worried about my lights being on. I 100%, I have a farm in southeast Illinois, I would love to go, and I can't have solar there. I would love to go completely off grid, and legally I cannot. Because
Not in the village of Chatham, but if you found a place that was out in a rural area and you wanted to wing it, you could do that.
So just
But in the village of Chatham, you're required to be connected
get it.
to
You could get it to $11. How about that? You could get it to this thing. So
Oh, yeah, you'd have to.
one of the things that goes into this discussion on what it is, we did talk about the fixed meter charge in that $11. It is cheap, and our friend from the Sierra Club left because I can almost guarantee you that if what I was to suggest was to the representative from the Sierra Club is we'll raise that fixed meter charge up to the spot where it's actually covering the fixed costs of the system, and that puts that at a spot where it's $80 to $90 a month for everybody just to have that fixed component in there, and lower the consumption charge down to that 5 cents, they would go ballistic. Because that's actually contrary to what you're trying to do with your own solar system, right? It encourages more energy use. It takes away the impetus to try to use LEDs. So there are competing interests in this spot with this too. So at some point,
Down to the net, as you mentioned, where does it balance out? If I have to pay, if I normally pay $80 a month and I'm paying 20 in fees and 60 in the other, if you flip flop that, it's still $80 a month.
to you, but it's not $80 a month to somebody that barely uses anything.
Right. Or to the school that uses a ton, right? They're going to see humongous savings, and it would be on the backs of the 95-year-old gentleman.
Right. So it's not that, yeah, that's not as simple as just to you. If your bill's $100 and however we manipulate it, that it gets to the spot where the math now says you actually somehow managed to get a $100 bill, wonderful. That would be the rare. That would be the unicorn in the entire pile.
Varies off who uses what.
Yes, and that's
I choose to use less by producing.
that's how that rate is currently structured at this point in time.
And I think the important part is, this is different than we've ever dealt with in our lifetimes. And we're trying to fight this new problem with old theory. I mean, because we keep running well, this is what it costs us if we get it from here. This is what we cost if we get it from here. And I don't have the answer for what the new theory is. I really don't. But we're trying to do something new using the old logic.
Yeah, I agree. Part of the problem there, though, is that the village has committed to purchase that old logic until the bonds are up, right? So we're, in a way, we're kind of like decisions made by previous boards put us in a position where we can't change logic around like that quickly, because I mean, the worst thing, I shouldn't say the worst thing, this is going to sound terrible, but if everybody switched to solar, like let's say in that guy's extreme example, 80% of the town switched to solar, and if the one-to-one was existent, you all understand that for the majority of time, the fixed cost wouldn't be covered by that 80%. And that humongous expense would get burdened to that 20% that couldn't make it. And the argument, one of the arguments is that, well, the 20% that couldn't make it is the 90-year-old lady who doesn't plan to be here for 25 years, or the guy that, doesn't have a lot of money in his bank account. Like that's one of the arguments being made, is it's the less fortunate that are going to feel the gigantic brunt of this super expensive system, whereas the people who could avoid it or made the decision or saw the future coming, they avoid it. So that's where the equity and fairness come in, I think is where.
Your meter charge goes to $250.
Right, or $3,000 a month, or whatever it becomes, because it's just, I think, again, I'm no expert, but I feel like the way that solar is going to work is it's a slower transition where we start to wean ourselves from these fossil fuels, and the government helps to subsidize that because the cost for solar is super high right now. But as more and more people do it, their economies of scale, it's going to get cheaper. And so all these monies are being dumped into it because they know that's the future for green and that's the right thing to do. But if you just did it overnight, like it'd be chaos because it just doesn't play out that way because there's bonds that are committed to 2040 that we can't walk away from.
Like it's chaotic is because all of a sudden you're going to be cutting our stuff in half.
No, I understand that.
I think that's where, I think there's a happy medium somewhere.
No, I understand that, and I think that maybe we should work on, notifying the folks that would be affected by this. But there's, to a certain extent, there's probably people considering it, negotiating it, talking to their banks that we don't know about. So this part of this meeting was to inform the general community, and we need to do that more. But I could argue that it never should have been one-to-one. And that probably won't sit well. But for the same reasons that we're trying to change it, it never should have been one-to-one. But realizing in looking and evaluating the plan, it's like, oh, man. And that's what I think other states got hit with, is they got gamed by some people that are super smarter than them, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars and walked away. Now, thankfully, there's only 37. And
our 5% would have been about 290.
Again, I'm not arguing that.
Yeah.
But again, if you go and look at the extremes, we have to protect everyone for the whole period, not just 37 people for today. You know what I mean? And I'm not decided. There's a lot that goes into this, but it's way more complicated than Facebook suggests. And that's what that's.
I think that's why everybody's team today, because it is a lot more complicated. And like even
Right.
a guy that doesn't even have solar came because he's like,
No.
wait a minute, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, amen.
It's so crazy.
Right, and we're none of us are experts in any of this,
Right.
but it's also not fair to suggest that we haven't been studying this and researching this on our own either, right? And I know that was suggested.
Moral because we choose to.
Right, those things are
That's fair to
suggested.
us.
We're normal people with kids and lawnmowers and everything else that you guys have. It's just that we try to make the best decision with the data we have, the data we're presented, the data from people that we trust, and obviously we want input from you all, which is why we tabled it. So let's have more conversations and make the fair decision. But again, 37 people might be upset with the decision that we make, but 5,000 people might be, okay, yeah, that was a good call. So that's just it is the way it is. Again, none of us have made our decisions, but.
So you can look at like CWLP and how they do it much differently than Chatham does it.
Sure.
Some other places in Sangamon County that
Yeah.
do it.
Again, those people are changing.
CWLP's policy could change within the next.
Right, and that's the thing that's the most important thing, is that we might change a year from now. I asked that question specifically because you guys are gonna go in and plug 0498 into your spreadsheet and bang, now my payback's not 6.7 years, it's 8.5 years. But when that rate changes next year, well, shoot, now it's 11 years. Or whatever, like, there's things outside of our control, but that's sort of the assumption that you guys made in purchasing these systems, is that, like, hey, based on what I know today, it's a good deal. In 8 years, I'll be good. But things change, and now it's not 8 and it's 11, and maybe it's 17, and then maybe it's 41 years, and my roof's caved in, or whatever.
Well, it's also very important to put out that the net metering policy was put into place. At the time that was put into place, it was offered at a 1-to-1 rate. Nobody from the village and nothing in our ordinances said
it will stay there.
It will stay there for 25 years. The 25 years was a discussion that you had and was based on whatever the sales presentation that you were presented with, and you made your informed decision. But at no point in time did the village say, this will be this way for the entire life of your system. So there's in anything that we do, there's always that component that says it's not incumbent upon the 6 people here that are voting on it to make sure you got exactly what somebody else sold you. That's not their responsibility, nor is that fair to ask them to do that, because while this one is very personal to you, and we get it, and everybody, I think, really respects what your feedback that you're getting, we get that. This is a very personal decision to you. It does impact everybody else. So if the board is sitting up here saying, look, Ms. Fritter, you were promised that this was going to be there and there for 25 years. That didn't come out of the village. So it's not their responsibility to vote for a policy that guarantees you what somebody else sold to you and what you thought was a good purchase.
Personally, I'm not worried about all that. What I want as a member of the Village of Chatham, I want transparency. I want to know the numbers. I want to see spreadsheets in front of me before decisions are made that are going to impact me. I think that's fair enough to everybody.
Right, and so what we know.
So I appreciate the time and effort you're putting into it and that you tabled it so that we can get that information.
The fact that none of us, and every one of us up here will readily admit, this is not my expertise, nor is it Dewey's or Matt's or Meredith or Kristen, nor is it any of yours. You know your system better than I can know your system.
I'd hire him in a minute. If we had solar, you'd be working for me.
I'm retired next year.
But what we do know, and what we do utilize, and what we have to rely on in a spot where it's not, I mean, if you want to ask me tax questions, I'll give you an answer. I know that stuff. I can do that. You have to pay me for it. Aside from this, it's a whole different story. You know, liability, net metering on my expertise. But in doing that, to even get to that decision, we have to reach to those that do know. And so in this instance, that's why IMUA, IMEA, IPA, who are the consultants that help us keep a stable system, a functional operation system that provides fair energy to everybody on demand. Well, they even went to their experts to further expertise. So, and I'll readily admit this, you and I could look at the report that IMEA got, and we could look at it for months, and we will not know more than what that guy told us in 5 minutes. But there is a definite need that anybody that sits in this president, and the guy that was on the board before, just left right before he's going to get up there, is you got to rely on the people that do this for a living, and that's how. We have our consultants, and it's not just a consultant to the board, that's a consultant to the entire community. And that's what he's looking at, and that's what they're looking at when they make these recommendations. Here's how this works for your entire community. In any decision, it may be amazingly to your benefit and wildly detrimental to yours. And then the next one, those roles may flip.
And over time, it might switch, right?
Yeah.
Like, because as more people switch to solar, the calculations change, and then suddenly the 1-to-1 isn't right. It should be 1-to-5 or whatever. Like, it can get complicated, and that's the difficulty in our positions is, you know, we try to do the best with what we have at the time, and nobody's ears closed, nobody's making money. I can guarantee that. It's just difficult when people suggest that, you know, they were not paying attention or be.
Okay,
So here's where I think
what you're doing is immoral.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Or do you want to just go to the committee?
These people are doing the best they can.
We can take it in the committee. That way this kind of discussion can happen.
Yeah.
But it'd be
You want it
better.
in here, I think it's probably better at this point in the committee of the whole.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
way
I'm
all the trustees can discuss.
Right. I'm welcome to have more
Do you
discussion.
want to tell these guys that this is on our agenda in the committee meeting next week?
Yes.
Sure, the whole-
Continue having discussions on it? 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
March 8th.
Whatever. As printed
there's-
on the agenda. I
There's
said
two
that
meetings
earlier.
there's 2 meetings on March 8th. The first is this meeting, the regular village board meeting. The second meeting that'll occur afterwards, or 6:15, is the committee of the whole, where it's more of an open forum where the trustees and educators bounce ideas off each other. So we'll have another conversation about what we learned tonight and what we processed this next coming week.
What we've learned in 2 weeks.
And I think.
Hopefully what you guys can provide.
If you
What
watch
you
the
can-
video from 2 weeks ago, that's what you'll get next week.
Yeah,
or 2
these
weeks.
meetings are on YouTube.
We won't vote on
Format.
anything, but we will be discussing it.
Yeah, what to expect, the discussion on there, I think is everybody's kind of at the spot that there's something. We're telling you 1-to-1 is not a sustainable model in the equity portion of what all the intent behind the CJA and all of the other stuff's in there, so that equitable to all customers. So 1-to-1 isn't going to be it. So we've got a couple decision points that really, it's going to shift. Shift to what? When's it going to shift? And to what extent can we actually do something that helps fulfill the promise that the salespeople made to you when you signed on and said this is the agreement? That,
The grandfather term.
yes. What is it?
Years that you guys decide, right?
That's primarily where the board is going to be able to address on those three issues. So, one, how do we make wholly the equation that you guys bought up? Can we do it? How long can we do it? What can the board do, and what are they willing to do? From that point on, anybody new
What's it look?
will be provided a formula that they can make their decision on at that point in time. And that formula will center around this fair solar credit and what those avoided costs are, and not penalize somebody that can't afford to do it or doesn't have, has too much canopy cover and just actually can't do it, where it doesn't make sense at all to them.
There might be an argument for penalizing the folks that are not green, so that we can say, hey, in Chatham, we want more solar. So there might be an argument made
could be a solution.
where, if, let's say the solar net rate is 5 cents, maybe we decide to credit it at 6 because we want our citizens to make that change to green.
We
Like
just
that,
say incentive to
right.
convert to
Who
solar
pays for it?
instead of-
Well, the same people we've been arguing about. The traditional people that can't afford to move pay for it. But maybe it's not as extreme as it exists today. But I mean, that's what subsidies are, right? That's what the feds and the state are doing. They're taking money from here and moving it over there because that's their mission, or that's what they believe that should occur. We can do the same thing through this same method.
Well, we also need to go to the state and federal level too, because they have discontinued their subsidies and discontinued their part of the deal too. So that's something else that needs to be heard at the higher level too.
Those things always change also, so what
Right,
has
but-
gone
yeah.
can come back, and that's the crux
But
of
they
the
have different
situation.
pockets than we do to do a lot of the subsidies.
So back to like
For now,
the
yeah.
meeting forum. So in 2 weeks on March, what did you say?
8.
So it'll be like this, kind of like a back and forth type?
It's not, again.
It can be.
Well,
The biggest difference, and this is unusual, we're at the back end of the meeting.
this is really unusual.
We have,
We're trying up here.
we have
really are.
business.
You don't know how lucky you are.
Yes, we have business that we do need to get to. We had an impromptu town hall right now. This is essentially what just happened.
So we would have this village meeting that you get your 5 minutes and that's it. And then Dewey leads the committee of the whole. He leads our trustees and he can allow whatever he wants.
I did have one final question, and maybe answer in 2 weeks. And it hasn't really come up yet, but what in the calculus has changed? In 2016, the board passed 1-to-1 for a reason. And now it's wanting to change it.
The cap.
It
The
was
cap
capped.
is what changed. So when you initially set that 1-to-1, not more, there was a limit on how much solar energy could be produced by residences in town. And so that 1-to-1 says, okay, when there's a cap, here's the exposure. Well, there's no cap now. We can't put that in there. So that's what's changed in the calculus. That portion has changed. So to be incentivized, to use a word that you've done, to encourage people to be early adopters into it at that point in time, completely unknown endeavor. You were getting sales pitches from somebody that could not show you who's done it and what their results were.
So something to consider. You have to get rid of the cap, supposedly. legally.
Correct.
We have to.
Not supposedly.
Yeah, we have to do that.
You don't have to change it to 1-to-1. So, as a compromise, once you get to the 300 solar users, or whatever the number is at the time, then you can change
The one-to-one.
But then we're gonna have the same issue we have now, where those 260 people come forward and say, we've signed on for 25 years. And so what are you gonna do for us now?
But they'll know going into it
How many residential?
that when we get to 5%, it's going to change.
Understood.
Before this all
Yeah,
happened,
probably
when we got to 5%,
like an
you
acre.
just couldn't get new customers.
5,000.
Nothing in the financial reasons, you just weren't allowed to people to have a system.
I think,
Yeah,
though,
we're gonna,
that we can't do
at that point in time, what you're gonna get is to say, you know, Jason got this for 30 years. And because at the point in time when I signed up, so did 100 other people. I got it for a year. Now you've messed me up. And that also will have some of the, and I see where you're trying to go. You're trying to say, okay, how do you continue to encourage
With a
it?
house limit.
That,
Number.
that in it,
Houses.
that in and of itself, though, is going to do opposite of what you're doing, because you'll get close to it. And then as everybody starts to say, well, if it's 300 people, I don't want to be 290. I don't want to be 250. I don't want to be 240.
That would have happened regardless, and none of this have changed. If the new law hadn't come out, you didn't have to get rid of the cap. That cap would have been there, and at 5%, you had the exact same issue, regardless of whether or not you kept one.
So you would be willing to see an ordinance that said, when we get to 300, we go to 048.
When you get to your 5% was chosen for a reason.
Right.
So whatever that reason is, when that.
Do you remember if that was a minimum? Or
So, but you guys had the 25-year commitment, and in 10 years, let's say we get to your 5%, you're now going back to 048.
I know we had them. I didn't.
Well, but I'm saying if we do that, we wouldn't grandfather because you guys are part of the 300.
State statutes after March 4th or after March 15th, you're not allowed to discriminate customers.
Yeah, we can't.
Right.
Once you grandfather in, you're good to go. After that point, everybody has to be the same. So if you don't wish that, then you're not going to be able to participate.
Right. So, I mean, you're part of the 300 at that point, so you couldn't be grandfathered in. If we said once we get to 300, it all switches to 048.
It has to be the same for everybody.
Right.
So the fair solar credit is consistently applied to everybody that uses the fair solar credit. The retail rate is consistently applied to everybody that's in that rate class.
Right, I have the same question, actually, now that.
Correct. I don't know that we could. That's up to him.
So.
Can we grandfather?
Yeah.
Prior to March 14th?
You can grandfather now.
On March
Can we grandfather in December? Is a good question.
If we make that.
Per the state law, you can.
By the next board meeting, though, we would be past March 14th.
Yeah, so I think what they're saying is anyone who's got an exception has to be done by that.
So we would have to discuss it.
I didn't see that in the document.
We'd have to discuss it at the March 8th meeting.
Going back to the.
And call a special
more
meeting.
expertise.
We
The
discussed
guy
it
that knows
Monday.
the legal side will actually find that answer for us. He's not going to find it today.
That's why I'm bringing it now, so you get 2 weeks to.
Good point.
We still won't be able to vote on it, though, until the meeting.
We could call a special meeting.
A special meeting, okay. There you go.
Just got to get it before the
We don't
14th.
want to mess that up.
Maybe.
If there's a deadline.
Depending on what.
Yes, sir. We don't want to keep stopping you from.
The other question I have for the board or the village or whoever appropriate, could you show us what the new, at a different rate, is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be, the paragraph is the same. Is it going to be at the end of the month, I get 50 cents or 40 cents for the 1 kilowatt hour? Or then do I have, that's what I'm interested in.
Our billing software it was upgraded a year ago.
Correct.
That has helped with the solar. It's still not perfect, but the plan is that the way that we bill now will still be the same way.
Monthly true.
Let's forget about the system. I'm wanting the simple facts. How does the process work?
Monthly true up. So if you draw, again, guys jump in and correct me, but if you draw 10,000 units, you pay 12 cents for 12,000 units. Today, you, at a 1-to-1, if you push in 15,000, then you get a credit of 12 cents for 15,000. At the end of the year, if you have a net credit, like you are actually owed money after, because every month was like that, we don't write you a check. It goes to zero. At the end of the year, 2023, you start over, start fresh. That's how it works today when you're overing. When you're equal, you would just pay the $11 a month type of a thing. If you're under, if you again produce 10, consume 10, produce 8, you would get a charge for 10 times 12 cents and a credit for 8,000 times 12 cents. Today, that's how it would work. Now, in the future, if the solar rate occurs and it's lowered, the way it would work is you bought 10,000 at 12, you're credited for the 8,000 you pushed into the system at 5. Every month, that would happen. So if there was a month where, and you could sit down and process that because it takes a while, but if there was a month where you overproduce, like let's say you overproduce in July, theoretically you'd end up with a credit. If you underproduce in the next month in August, you'd burn through that credit and would owe.
But wait a second, that's a huge change. What we just said there is, if I use 1,000 and generate 1,100, I'll be charged 12 cents for 1,000, and I'll be paid back 4 cents for the 1,200.
Yes.
Where today, it's only the difference.
I understand that, and that's something I struggle. I understand, and that's something that I struggle to understand too. Is that you don't net it and then do the calculation. It's
today.
Right. I mean, I'm saying in the future under the 5 cent thing. If it was a 1-to-1, you could net it anytime you want it. It doesn't really matter, right? You could do it hourly. It would, because it's equal at the end of the month. It would all pan out. But if the rate is reduced to 5 cents from 12, then every month there's going to be that true up, and every month you're going to get dinged, if you will, because of that. Now, one thing to argue is that, anyway, are you with me? And we can talk through it more. I'm not saying you agree with me, but you understand.
I do, and I want to confirm that what you said is true. So let's take the perfect month. I zeroed out. I used 1,000. I generated 1,000.
Yep.
And your meter shows it both ways.
Yep.
I pushed 1,000 out, but I pulled 1,000 in.
Yep.
You're telling me that I would pay 12 cents for my 1,000 so I'd have $120.
Yep.
And from that 120, we would subtract
A credit of
40
$50.
bucks.
A credit of $50. Yep. That's how. Again, I'm not saying I designed that or that it was my idea or anything like that, but that's how I understand it would work.
But then we're still losing $70 or $60.
Right. I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying I designed it or it's my idea, but that's how
That's a
I understand it
misnomer.
would work.
You didn't produce all of your electricity. But that's the misnomer of what the mechanics and the actual physics of what's going on. You didn't produce all of your electricity because at some points of that time you needed somebody else producing for you. At other points in time, you had more than you could use and you needed a market. And you're looking for a market. And what you're asking, what the 1-to-1 says is, I should be provided a market that I don't have to do anything for. I don't have to build a distribution system for. I don't have to do any of the building. I should have a market that pays me exactly what my retail cost is without any effort on my own other than having something on my house. That's the difference. So when you say we generated all of our own electricity, that's not an accurate statement. And you generated as much as you used over the course of the month, but you did not generate all your own electricity.
But that goes back to you're selling it to my neighbor.
Right. This 27 delta.
And you're
Right.
saving the transmission costs.
Yep.
Correct. We're saving 3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what we're saving. We avoid that. I'm sorry, we avoid 5 cents, that fair solar credit. That's what the village as a whole saves. And we're willing to give you that. But it is the fairness issue is what you're asking on a one-to-one is saying, I get that you could have got that for 5 cents. But you should give me 12.
But that kilowatt that you're taking from me and giving my neighbor doesn't actually cost you anything.
It costs us 5 cents.
No, it saves you 5 cents.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the.
It does. If it cost us nothing, we wouldn't be having a conversation on whether we pay you for it.
But that's my point. You charge my neighbor 12 cents for that kilowatt. That goes into your bank account. Since I'm the one that produced it, you give it to me. Your bank account is at 0. But you don't have to pay a maintenance bill next month of 5 cents.
But when we buy it elsewhere, there is a cost. And then there's the markup that covers all the internal action that happens.
But you're getting all that out when I'm getting it to my neighbor. That's the point.
If, and I'll agree with you, if you had a system that could produce 24 hours a day and we didn't need any of that other stuff. The one-to-one is actually asking the village, because I have more than I need right now, I want you to take it, be my battery, yes, be my bank, be my savings account, so that when I do need it, you give it back. It is.
You can't store electricity in our system.
Correct. That is 100% correct. But what you're asking us to do is buy it from you at the retail rate and give it back to you at exactly the same. At a time when you need it. And that occurs regardless of whether it's buying from you. We have to pay for the stuff to come in. No matter where it comes from, there's no free energy that gets created. Whether it travels 20 feet or 2,000 miles, every kilowatt has a cost of production associated with it, and it gets bought by the village. Whether the village buys that at 8 cents or 12 cents, you're asking for 12, we can get it for 8.
But then it costs you 5 to get it to the person's house.
And so let me ask you this. Let me phrase it this question. If you were off the grid, if that delivery system didn't exist, what would you do with it?
Put it in a very expensive battery.
Okay. Which you still can, and can't avoid this.
But
But
disadvantage all the non-solar people even more because you have fewer people paying the maintenance fees for the entire system.
no, our system gets smaller by a unit every single time.
So you're saying that if I take myself off the grid, it's not advantageous to everyone else?
No, one on, one off is not changing our equation. It's not going to. If you decided, other than the requirement that you have to have at least some connection, which will cost you $11 a month because we always want to make sure that even if something happens on your own, if you wanted to self-serve yourself, make the investment in the batteries so that you had the ability to have power on demand when you couldn't generate. Yes, but there's also a tremendous cost to that. And you've all recognized the fact. If you wanted to add the batteries to the extent that you could save power and store enough to run your house for an extended period of time without getting any supplement into that system, there's a tremendous cost to that. Yes?
If I disconnected my meter, it wouldn't make the shadow system any cheaper.
If you were trying to store,
Make everyone else's bill more expensive.
if you're trying to store energy to the spot where you have it on demand at any point in time, based solely on what you're producing so that you can save your credits at all point in time, there's a tremendous cost for you as a homeowner in the batteries. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a cost for the city.
On a one-to-one ratio, what you're asking everybody else is to essentially bank my production until I need it. Give me 12 when I put it in, and I'll give you 12 when I put it out.
Dave, the other thing that people are forgetting is electricity is purchased the day before. So they turn around and take a look at the history. So today on 2/2/22, okay, they go back and look over the years and say, all right, Chatham averages 5 megawatts of electricity on this day. So they go out and get with our suppliers and they order 5 megawatts of electricity for the village of Chatham, because that's what we usually use. Well, today was warm. We didn't have to use as much electricity. We only used 4 megawatts. Guess what? We paid for 5. So if you're generating more electricity and you put it out there, you think you're helping us, but it really doesn't make any difference because we paid for 5 megawatts and we only were able to collect money for 4.
But over time, that average number is going to take into account the solar producers. You might produce 5 megawatts on June 1st in 2017, but in 2023, you're only going to average 4 because of all the solar producers. So that's taken into account.
But it goes back in history. I mean, our electric suppliers don't know that until they turn around and look and see how much we use. So then now they go back at the next year for this date in 2023 and look and go, well, was it because there's 3 more solar customers, or was it because it was a cloudy day, or was it because it was 50 to get today? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into factoring how much electricity they buy.
And way more of it has to do with things that are totally unrelated to solar.
Exactly.
So
you can't pinpoint that when going back and looking at the numbers. Like to his point,
yeah.
What was the reason on 2/2/22 they used only 4 instead of the 5 they bought? Well, somebody's going to have a Rain Man memory to say, oh, that's because it was 50 degrees outside.
But all that stuff gets
Do you get to keep that extra kilowatt?
No.
Because once electricity is ready, it's gone.
It's kind of a loss. So you got to guess as close as you
So
can.
we have the same problem as you guys do. If you produce over, we've got to transmit it somewhere, we can't save it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they turn around and do essentially what you're doing on your house at a very small scale. They'll turn around and try to do that on a grand scale. So they'll turn around and say, okay, look, we committed to buying 5, we have to buy 5, and then it gets to the spot that, holy cow, we only need 4. They will go back out and at that moment try to find a market, try to find somebody who underestimated.
Yeah.
And figure out how much of what I committed to my cost can I get recouped. So if I paid, for $1 million worth of electricity and we used 800 million of it, is it better to eat 200,000 or would I take $100,000 and cut that loss in half? That's what you're going to do. So the market that they go back to resale on is not paying at the same rate that you get your guarantee on.
Yeah.
It's not there. And that depends on, did everybody overestimate or did everybody
underestimate, and then you're paying a fortune.
Yeah. And if everybody in the system except you underestimated that day, you're going to make a ton of money by being the only person with supply. But if everybody overestimated, which is where they fall most of the time, intentionally overestimate, because you don't want a brownout. You don't want to go home, flip the light switch, and it not work because we ran out of power today. That's not there. But the resale market is not the same as the initial purchase. And that's the same thing we're telling you. You're doing that on a very, very small scale.
It can be higher or lower.
But you're potentially.
When the gentleman talked about how this could fluctuate from year to year, are you guys ready with your budget and to fluctuate with the market year to year? Like he said, this year it could be, the 0.48. Next year it could be, are you guys
Yes, those things
get
beat in.
We try to keep it as small margin as we can to keep your power rates down.
Yep.
Because if we looked at a 5-year average, then your margin is going to be higher.
Yep.
Our supplier can turn around and say, you know what, we think electric rates, the coal and everything else in the power plants, they're going to keep the rates pretty steady. And we turn around and then base our electric department budget off of that with an estimate of how much we're going to get in revenue. based off of how much electricity we sell.
So our rates then fluctuate from that 0.048 with that?
They do, but it's so minute that it's that we look at electric rate increases maybe once every 3 years. You know, that's what we've been looking at. And adjusting it, yeah. So last, September, November, we raised it 3%. Okay. So those are in place, but there's other factors. We don't.
We're going to try to keep it. I mean, I would think, I'm speaking for myself, I'd like to keep it from going like this right here. Yeah. But at the same time, though, you've got to realize that we have a budget too, and we've got to make sure that we can afford our.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Is your budget? Would you do that, or would you just make a set mark now and then adjust it later?
I don't think we're gonna. I can't say that because we're not voting yet.
Yeah.
But I would think from our conversation tonight, we're not going to be able to set it. Just like the people who set it 1-to-1.
We don't adjust our rates day to day, month to month, year to year.
I didn't know, so you would set this and it would just be in place.
The solar credit, I asked that question, the solar credit would be recalculated annually based on the previous year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's 0.489 right now, but it might be 0.513 next year. Or yes.
Because it's minute.
Yes.
You would just flow it.
Yes, it will ebb and flow.
We're gonna try to keep.
Right. Yeah. The suggested rate will ebb and flow based on the market and the sun and everything else. The way that we, as a board, implement it, we could just blindly say we're going to use IUMA's rate indefinitely, and whatever they decide to do, our customers are going to have to deal with. Or we could say the Village of Chatham's rate is 0.490, and that's because we like that rate.
Yeah.
And we can leave it there forever, but I think the intent is to follow the suggestion of the consultants.
That happens on an annual basis with the electric rate, with what the retail rate is and the wholesale, because we don't get a firm number.
No.
Because of all the dynamics in that pricing, and it changes, like he said, every 5 minutes the price is changing. We get an estimate. Here's what we think over the course of the year your supply is going to cost you X per kilowatt hour. Now the board gets that estimate, they look at it, and as part of the budgeting process, they turn around and say, wow, that one jumped tremendously this year. And then we start asking questions. Is this permanent? Is this a blip? Is this temporary? How much of that do we need to pass on to our customers? How much of it do we think is going to go away next year? Or is this the trend that it's on? And you need to recognize that stuff. So every year we get an estimate of what we think our supply cost is going to be, in the same way that we'll get an estimate on what this fair value is going to be on it. And then the board has to make a decision.
Okay.
Do you accept that? Do you do less? Do you do more? Do you do nothing?
So if you pay 8 cents for power from outside the city, you pay us 5 cents for the power we produce. We're subsidizing something at 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
No, you're paying 3 cents per kilowatt hour to have access to all of the infrastructure that can continue to pay.
So,
That's what you're doing on that.
So if the city is pretty much down to 1-to-1, I would like to see an alternative suggestion be that instead of the fair credit, consider that we just get paid market.
Yeah.
Not 1-to-1, but just the market rate at the time.
The market rate, the retail rate that we,
Wholesale.
If we bought electricity for 8 cents, we give him 8 cents.
right, and so I understand, now that it's been clarified, I understand that, but what that 8 cents does is it avoids the fixed costs that we've been talking about. Like the lineman, it effectively, because that 8 cents that we buy from our wholesaler doesn't have our internal lineman calculated in there, or our trucks, or our fuel.
Yeah, but
No, but you still need those guys employed, you still need them available at the edge of a storm.
And you still need the power plant at the very beginning, and you need the distribution mains that get it from that power source all the way to our doorstep. So it's got to get to Arby's and hit that station before.
Isn't 8 cents covering the cost of the transmission?
It does
The
not.
8 cents just covers
No.
that kilowatt.
Yeah.
kilowatt.
I think he's right.
It's supply
I think he's right.
plus it's the variable cost.
So how much do you get charged for the distribution from the wholesale?
It's all baked into the rate.
It goes into that. Now there's 37.
It's 12 rate. It's
There's-
part of the 12 rate, right?
There's 37.
No,
Hang
it's
on.
not the 12 rate.
I can answer this if you let me. There are 37 member communities that buy from the same electric conglomerator, the guy that goes out and the group that goes out and looks for marketing price and guarantees capacity and do that. They take the total cost of everything that they do at that level, and the board in their board in their rate setting process has just said the best way that we have to spread this cost out is to take our total, which includes our variable supply costs, plus all of our fixed asset costs, plus all of our insurance and our interest. So everything that goes into having it done, and we're going to take that and divide it into what everybody uses. So you're paying, our wholesale rate includes 5 cents of, that's what that study that IMUA did to determine what that the number that they've got. That's what that study is looking at. Of the 8 cents per kilowatt hour, the 5 cents is the variable portion, the 3 cents is the fixed portion. Those things both are in there, and the two added together become our total cost. We don't pay a meter charge at our doorstep. The total cost of providing electricity from a wholesale perspective to Arby's, to the substation, is divided between 40 communities that have agreed to, we're going to make investments in power plants, we're going to make investments in purchase contracts, we're going to do all these things with the goal of getting the total power for all 40 done at a cheaper rate than anyone could do on an individual basis, and spread the risk and spread a lot of that out among a lot of people so that you don't have wild fluctuations and you don't have a lot of these challenges. But when we buy wholesale, when we're talking about the wholesale rate that the village is paying for electricity, there's a portion of it that is variable, and there's a portion of it that's fixed.
So we're saving you, so the fair tax or fair rate.
Fair tax. That was a whole different ordeal.
We are not going
The
there.
fair
Yeah.
rate is
Fair tax.
the variable portion of the wholesale cost.
Yes.
Yes, the easiest,
You're passing that savings on to us.
the cost that everybody else avoided, what we avoid paying. We avoid the variable. So when
No, I
think of it as a stack, all right? And
He's got it.
you got it.
I got it. Before I go, I understand all of this, and I get the arguments, but as a city, it's more than just numbers. It's also about where we want to get this community. So this will 100% disincentivize future solar in Chatham. No questions asked. And if that's what we want to do, then you can go straight by the numbers. But I've known my fair share of bean counters and businesses over decades, and no one takes them out of the drinks.
I think that it's true that real quick.
I disagree.
I think real quick. I think it's true that future
That's your
solar.
personality.
I think it's true that future solar users, if they had a solar credit, would have an ROI less than what the 1-to-1 would use. But I don't think it means solar's dead, and I think it makes the sale a bit more difficult. That's probably why the sales folks reached out to some people and said, hey, you got to stop this, because the salespeople are likely trying to sell these systems, and the sale becomes more difficult when the ROI becomes lower and the payback period becomes longer. And again, it's not, we all love green. We all have kids and want futures and all these things, but it's super complicated. But it doesn't mean that solar's dead. It just means that it's going to take a little bit longer to make sense. But as more people buy solar, the solar prices come down, that payback period becomes lower. So there's all this stuff that's flying around every direction. But it doesn't necessarily mean that solar's 100% dead.
No.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, you're right. You're right.
You're right.
What it really does is changes that salesman's pitch next time.
Yes, yes, it does.
I mean, it really does. He's got new information. He's got to change what he's saying to you.
He needs
I've been
to
a
adjust his
salesman.
approach.
I sell to kids every day. I got to change my pitch all the time. Right. I can't go and blame my principal or my board every time something changes. I have to go with the information that I've got and make it better for my kids down the road. Plain and simple.
But if you need to buy a house and the mortgage rate is 3% one day and it's 15% the next day, some people just won't be able to afford.
Absolutely.
You're right.
And just like we can't keep affording, if we get 300 people in the next 2 months to put them in,
19.8.
the amount of impact on our system after 300, as you said earlier, is we can't do it. So we're trying to make sure that we manage that as we go along. And I understand, dude, you're good. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm saying I want to get solar on my house. I'm trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and your house,
because I see these problems.
The house and the interest rate isn't apples to apples either. No. It actually causes the same thing they just said. I want to get $300,000 for my house, but I have to change my pitch. What's my goal? Is my goal to get $300,000, or is it to get somebody to buy my house? If my goal is to get somebody to buy my house, my pitch changes. I'll take 280. I'll take 270. I'll take 260. But in this conversation, you know who's not present is the guy with the house, the guy that's selling you the solar panels. At what point has he said the equation changed, the math changes, my price is going to reduce? They didn't sell you their system at wholesale, nor would they buy it back for you at the same retail rate that you paid.
I see the solar providers as the realtors. They're getting
for sure. Yeah.
out of the sale. The price of the equipment isn't set. The price of the house isn't set by the realtor. So,
Yeah, but none of those components are changing, right? They're not lowering their commission in that argument, nor is the supplier changing their price.
right,
But you're asking, you do ask the village, and you ask everybody else, cover me. You know, net zero, this goal is actually saying, I want something added to my house that I didn't pay for. That's net zero. Yes, because at the end of the day, I got everything, and I either got credit for it, or I saved X, which is what we all do.
I'm pretty sure I paid a really big check when I got my solar panels.
And you're trying to recoup that, right? You're trying to get back to a break-even point where everything that you've invested, you've recovered either in the form of savings or sales.
Did your salesman tell you that number could change? Did he warn you that this could happen?
So I'm not to get into my personal finances, but I'm not exactly in the situation. I don't have a 25-year loan on my solar panels. Like, my panels are paid for. So awesome. I get your argument. It kind of doesn't compute with me because I didn't choose to go that path. So, I mean, we've been here a long time. We're going to have a long conversation in 2 weeks, I'm sure. So.
Yeah.
Can I have
Committee of the whole, March 8th.
All right, let me suggest that we adjourn and you can talk one-to-one.
That gentleman is.
I'll make that motion.
Did you notice that the only logos you saw on him was his
Yes.
company's solar logos? Did you catch that? Yeah. His hat had the logo on it. His shirt, his jacket had a logo on it.
His pants had the logo.
Yes.
He was
So why
awesome.
do you think he came and got on video with all of this?
He doesn't want to be out of business. He doesn't want to have to go and understand these
But we don't want to be out of business either.
I'm not defending him.
No, I'm just saying it's odd that he shows up
I
with all the logos on
And lives in the reserve.
and lives in the reserve.
We do have a motion to adjourn. Is there?
I'll second.
Second.
Trustee Chow made a motion to adjourn, seconded by Trustee
Aye.
Ferguson. All in favor?
Aye.
Now they
March
can all
8th,
talk to you one-to-one.
You can all sit and talk to us now.